It's 5:08 p.m. I do detect a quorum. I see Councilwoman Allen is present. Councilman Druffel present. Councilwoman Evans Siegel present. Councilman Gregg present. Councilwoman Gamble is present. Councilman Huffman present. Councilman Spain present. Councilwoman Suara present. Vice Chair Toombs present. Councilwoman Webb present. We'll start off with public comment. Pursuant to Council Rule 28, the public comment period at committee meetings is limited to items that appear on the committee agenda. All public comment speakers must present proof of Tennessee residency, which that has already been done. Public comment is also limited to a total of 8 minutes. Director Darby is going to help me keep track of that 8 minutes. There are 4 people on the list, and if there's time remaining, we will move on to the wait list. On the list of folks who have signed up, Isaiah Henderson, Amy Claver, Jeanette Barber, Mike Lacey. If you want to just move to the mic at the back. And I will start with Mr. Henderson, speaking in support of Bill 2025-846. You're recognized, sir.
Good evening, members of the council. I am an outreach worker. I work for Nashville Downtown Partnership in District 19. I have been with them a little over a year now, and I've seen the impact that they've made on countless lives in the downtown area. Just as the outreach team, and when they brought me on, I wasn't in the best part of my life, in the best place, and they gave me a chance. They reached their hand out and brought me aboard and put me in a situation where I could help those in the community that I serve. And I've seen so many people come to us and ask us for their help, and we've been able to reconnect them with family. We've been able to put them into treatment or any kind of situation that they were in. We didn't hesitate. We always reached that hand out and served them and met them where they're at. They trained us. They gave us the training to do everything that we could do, and I support the bid expansion because they are able to do more, reach more people. There are more people that need to be served, and I think that that they have every opportunity to do so. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Amy Claver. And if I'm mispronouncing your name, please let
Annie
me know.
Claver, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Annie Claver. I'm a master captain with the United States Coast Guard and a commissioner for the Transportation Licensing Commission. I've lived in Nashville for almost 20 years, and I love this city. Thank you all who also voted for me on the commission. Before selling and exiting my company, River Queen Voyages, in January, I was the first owner of a downtown river recreation company in Nashville. Due to Metro Parks' lack of funding and having other priorities, my crew, myself, and the other river outfitters became the default safety patrol and cleanup crews on the east and west banks of the riverfront. Over a decade of time, since 2015, among other things, we have performed river rescues, assisted unhoused people on the riverbanks in and around Old Tent City, and cleaned up things like litter, bodily waste, and broken glass on the embankments. In the short time the Nashville Downtown Partnership has begun their efforts in Riverfront Park, I've already noticed a marked difference. Their ambassadors are caring, attentive, and resourceful. They truly care about keeping the Central Business Improvement District safe and attractive and providing much needed assistance in underfunded and underpatrolled areas like the riverfront. The proposed expansion of the CBID to areas adjacent to downtown will allow an extension of services to enhance the safety, cleanliness, and vibrancy of downtown Nashville for our growing downtown population and the millions who visit our beloved city. I respectfully encourage you to support BL 2025-846, and I'm grateful for your leadership and service to Nashville. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jeanette Barber, also speaking in support of Bill 2025-846. You're recognized.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to speak tonight. I live in District 34. I work in District 19 as part of the Nashville Downtown Partnership staff. And I have spoken about this legislation to council before, but today just want to reiterate our position at the NDP, which is that this proposed bid expansion comes before this committee and council at the request of downtown property owners. A yes vote means that this body can enable the technical change needed to provide these property and business owners with the tools they've asked for in order to help pay for neighborhood services at no cost to Metro. The International Downtown Association estimates that there are more than 2,500 business improvement districts across North America. It is a proven mechanism to keep downtowns clean, safe, active, and attractive. Today, our downtown consists of 3,500 property owners, 21,000 residents, 85,000 people coming to work downtown, and these residents, business, and property owners are overwhelmingly supportive of this tool and are happy to tax themselves to deliver services to make the neighborhood well cared for and a great place for visitors and locals alike to spend time. We contribute in downtown 11% of Davidson County's property taxes and nearly 18% of our retail taxes on less than 0.5% of land acreage. We think that's pretty great and benefits all Nashvillians. And we appreciate this council's consideration of this vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mr. Mike Lacy speaking in opposition to Bill 2025-846. You're recognized.
I don't know if we should have more bids or not. I didn't really know what a business improvement district was until a week ago. And it seems like a lot of people in this room didn't either, because there is a really important piece of this that's only recently come to light, is that let's call it an assessment, as people want to, although we just heard it called taxes. It's a form of coercive revenue that the city is collecting on behalf of a board. And there is a little piece of oversight that is supposed to happen before they decide they want to spend it on security, on vendors who explode, allegedly, our public utilities. So what recourse do we have? Well, in the actual founding law, you have oversight over their budget, and it looks like, from my research, and I can't get Metro to weigh in if I'm correct or not, but that you've not exerted your oversight in 21 years, which means that every dollar that passed through the District Management Corporation and then thence to the Downtown Partnership was without authorization, if I'm correct in this. So it was allocated for that purpose, but it was not authorized to be sent to them, which is a problem that Metro Finance has consistently with things like contracts for vendors at the Strobel House being paid in excess of what they're contracted for. Why is there not a check for the authorization of funds in excess of $10 million, yet to get a $5,000 grant? So much overhead, so many hoops.
Thank you, Mr. Lacy.
Why?
Can I read this name? There are 30 seconds left. And if Mr. Gary Morgan, I'm sorry, I couldn't read the writing.
All right, let's see how well I can do here. In the spring of 2020.
Speaking in support.
Yes, ma'am, I'm here in support. In the
846.
spring of 2025, after being a downtown resident for 5 years, I found myself in the hospital. My surgeon looked at me and said, "I think you're going to need quadruple bypass." After 8 days in the hospital, I came home and living in the Gulch in rehab and recovery in a clean location, in a location with meaningful services, with great sidewalks, with downtown partnership that's on the streets on a continual basis has been helpful for my recovery, which one of the reasons I'm in support of this. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. All right, that concludes the public comment period. And I think we can move on to the presentation first. Or no? No? It's at the end? Okay. All right, no problem. Okay, so we will move on to our agenda items. The presentation is last. So on consent, we have RS 2025-1352, 1353, 1354, 1356, 1357, 1358, 1359, 1360, 1361, 1362, 1363, 1364, 1365, 1366, 1367, 1368, 1369, 1370, 1371, 72, 73, Bill 2025-910, Bill 2025-911, Bill 2025-912. Does anything need to come off of consent? Councilwoman Evans Siegel?
Thank you, Vice Chair. BL 2025-910 and BL 2025-911.
Councilwoman Allen?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. RS 2025-1368.
Does anything else need to come off of consent? All right, I will read the captions. RS 2025-1352, a resolution accepting a community correction services grant from the Tennessee Department of Correction to the Metropolitan Government, acting by and through the state trial courts to divert eligible offenders from the Tennessee prison system by providing community-based supervision and treatment services through the Davidson County Community Corrections Program. Item number 2, RS 2025-1353, a resolution approving the appointment of additional hearing officers by the Independent Metropolitan Board of Equalization to conduct preliminary hearings and make investigations regarding complaints before the board, sponsors Porterfield and Gadd. RS 2025-1354, sponsors Porterfield, Evans, and Bowe, a resolution approving an interlocal agreement between the Emergency Communications District for Nashville and Davidson County and the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County for the provision of services and reimbursement of costs pertaining to enhanced 911 services. Resolution 2025-13, oh, no, not that one. Resolution 2025-1356, sponsors Coupon, Porterfield, and Gamble, a resolution to approve the 11th Amendment to the lease agreement between the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County and Square Investment Holdings LLC for office space in the Washington Square building located at 222 222 2nd Avenue North. Resolution 2025-1357, sponsors Porterfield and Hill, a resolution accepting the terms of a cooperative purchasing master agreement for maintenance, repair, operating supplies, industrial supplies, and related products and services for the Department of General Services. Resolution 2025-1358, sponsors Porterfield, Evans, Bowe, and others. Resolution accepting a grant from the Tennessee Department of Health to the Metropolitan Government, acting by and through the Metropolitan Board of Health for the public safety partnerships in high-impact areas to use available data to identify populations at high risk for adverse consequences from substance misuse and employ evidence-based interventions that are responsive to population needs. Resolution 2025-1359, sponsors Porterfield, Evans, Bowe, and others, a resolution appropriating a total of $1,248,108 from a certain account of the Community Safety Fund for grants to various nonprofit organizations for South Nashville community safety programs. Resolution 2025-1360, sponsors Porterfield, Evans, Bowe, and Ellis. Resolution approving an agreement between the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, acting by and through the Metropolitan Board of Health and Vanderbilt University Medical Center to provide clinical teaching experiences to individuals in the graduate medical education programs for pediatric residency and adult infectious diseases. Resolution 2025-1361, sponsors Porterfield, Evans, Bowe, and others. Resolution approving Amendment 1 to a grant from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to the Metropolitan Government, acting by and through the Metropolitan Board of Health to provide for the prevention, surveillance, diagnosis, and treatment of HIV/AIDS and to administer a Minority AIDS Initiative Program. Resolution 1362, 2025-1362, sponsors Porterfield, Evans, Bowe, Bradford, and others. Resolution accepting a grant from the Friends of Metro Animal Care and Control to the Metropolitan Government, acting by and through the Metropolitan Board of Health to provide funding for various programs for shelter animals. Resolution 2025-1363, sponsors Porterfield, Evans, Bowe, Allen, and others. Resolution accepting a grant from the Greater Nashville Regional Council to the Metropolitan Government, acting by and through Metropolitan Social Services to provide delivered meals to eligible seniors in their homes and in congregate meal sites throughout Davidson County. Resolution 2025-1364, sponsors Porterfield, Evans, Bowe, Allen, and others. Resolution accepting a grant from the Greater Nashville Regional Council to the Metropolitan Government, acting by and through Metropolitan Social Services to provide nutrition services to eligible seniors and transportation services for the elderly who are unable to drive or have no other means of transportation. Resolution 2025-1365, sponsors Porterfield, Gad, Bowe, Allen, and others. Resolution accepting the libraries as pillars of education and democracy grant from the Carnegie Corporation of New York to the Metropolitan Government, acting by and through the Nashville Public Library to implement leveled English as a second language classes at up to 5 branch locations in collaboration with partner organizations. Resolution 2025-1366, sponsors Porterfield, Evans, Gad, and others. Resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement by and between the State of Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance and the Metro Nashville Fire Department for the provision of annual fire and building safety inspection services for pre-kindergarten and kindergarten through 12th grade schools. Resolution 2025-1367, sponsors Porterfield and Evans. Resolution accepting the terms of a cooperative purchasing master agreement for marine equipment and supplies for the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department. Resolution 2025-1369, sponsors Porterfield. Resolution authorizing the Metropolitan Department of Law to compromise and settle the personal injury claim of Monica Bermudez against the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County in the amount of $60,000, and that said amount be paid out of the self-insured liability fund. Resolution 2025-1370, a resolution authorizing the Director of Public Property or his designee to exercise an option agreement for the purchase of a flood-prone property located at 4800 Blackman Court for Metro Water Services. Sponsors Johnston, Porterfield, Gamble, and Parker. Resolution 2025-1371, sponsors Porterfield, Parker, and Gad. Resolution approving Amendment 1 to an agreement between the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County and the City of Belle Meade to permit Metro Water to build and collect Belle Meade's residential and commercial stormwater user fee. Resolution 2025-1372, sponsor Porterfield. Resolution authorizing the Metropolitan Department of Law to compromise and settle the property damage claim of Kevin A. Hopkins against the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County in the amount of $49,889.82, with said amount to be paid out of the self-insured liability fund. Resolution 2025-1373, sponsor Porterfield. Resolution authorizing the Metropolitan Department of Law to compromise and settle the property damage claim of Broadway Honky Tonk Venture, LLC, DBA Nudies Honky Tonk, against the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County in the amount of $35,304, with said amount to be paid out of the self-insured liability fund. Bill 2025-912, sponsor Porterfield and Parker, an ordinance approving a pilot project between Vanderbilt University and the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, acting by and through the Department of Water and Sewerage Services for the provision of early warning detection for water management systems. Does anything need to come off of consent? Councilwoman Suara.
Thank you, Chair. If you will take our resolution 2025-1363, 1367, and 1373.
All right. 1363 is item 12. 1367, item 16. And what was the third one?
1373.
1373 is item 22. Does anything else need to come off of consent? Hearing nothing else, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda? It's been properly moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Is there any additional discussion? All those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting? Motion carries. All right, moving on to the items that were not on consent. Item number 4, Resolution 2025-1355, a resolution to approve the criteria for operating support and Thrive grants for fiscal year 2026 for the Metropolitan Nashville Arts Commission. Sponsors Porterfield, Gad, Vogt, and Welsh. Can I get a motion? Been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting? Motion carries. Item number 12, Resolution 2025-1363, a resolution approving a grant from the Greater Nashville Regional Council to the Metropolitan Government, acting by and through Metropolitan Social Services to provide delivered meals to eligible seniors in their homes and in congregate meal sites throughout Davidson County. Sponsors Porterfield, Evans, Vogt, Allen, and others. Can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councilwoman Suara?
Thank you, Chair. Do we have anyone from Social Services?
Yes, I see hands in the back. If you can identify yourself and you're recognized.
I'm Greg Perry, Program Manager Nutrition for Metro Social Services.
Thank you, sir. Great program. I'm in support. I'm a sponsor, but I just wanted to speak to one, how does the program work? What is the outreach to make sure it's reaching every part of the county?
Could you say the question again, please?
How does the program work? How do people know about it? How do we make sure that people are aware and it's reaching the entire county?
Our program works where we receive referrals from throughout the community through a medical provider for the need for someone that needs meals. We have 13 sites where we have congregate meals, where we reach out to them as they move into the high towers, things like that, and inform them of our needs. We go out in the community when we have our setups to inform people about what Metro Social Services is. We have flyers that go out. We also provide transportation to and from the sites for those who cannot go for congregate meals. We also provide meals to all 502 miles of Metro property here in Davidson County. So we provide close to, 300 meals a day at congregate and 500 or so a week on the home delivered. So.
Thank you, Chair. And people only get it through the referral, or they can come by those locations themselves?
They have to come through a referral.
And those are through medical referrals?
Yes, ma'am.
And so the medical organization that you're using are throughout the county, I will assume?
Yes, ma'am. It can be your primary care doctor. It can be a social worker. It can be any medical provider that sends a referral in that states your need for the services.
Okay. Is this the same thing as the transportation assistance as well?
That goes through WeGo, and if they qualify through WeGo, then we will provide them with the services to and from our sites, and we also provide 2 medical trips a month to and from the doctor.
And so if someone needs help with the transportation piece, they go through WeGo, and if they need help with food assistance, they talk to their doctor for
Yes,
a
ma'am.
referral. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? Councilwoman Ellis?
Thank you for recognizing me, even though I'm not on the committee. But I actually wanted to take a point of personal privilege and ask Ms. Carol Wilson if she could come up and tell us about the importance of this program that they have briefly.
Ms.
Thank
Wilson?
you. I'm Carol Wilson. I have been with Metro Social Services for over 30 years. I've been the program manager prior to Mr. Perry for 14 years. And as we know, when seniors are deprived of nutritional meals and have no means to have these meals provided or cooked for them, the Metro Social Services is here to do that services for them. Along with that, as Mr. Perry has stated, in our congregate meal site, we provide different types of activities. We know that if a person is isolated, especially as a senior and has no one to visit them, we look at them most of the time as declining in health. So yes, our program is very significant and important to meet the well-being of every person that is elderly, disabled, or in need of the meals. So we definitely need to make sure that this program goes on and on and on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting? Motion carries.
Thank you.
All right, item number 16, Resolution 2025-1367, a resolution accepting the terms of a cooperative purchasing master agreement for marine equipment and supplies for the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department, sponsors Porterfield and Evans. Can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Councilwoman Suara.
Thank you, Chair. In looking at the analysis, it said it's for marine equipment, and I look at the all the documents in there. I don't know what type of marine equipment, and so can someone speak to that? Does MMPD does operation in the water, and what type of equipment are we talking about?
I see someone approaching the back table. If you can introduce yourself and you're recognized.
Good afternoon, Chris Gilder, Metro Police Department. So this is an agreement in order for us to primarily to purchase the watercraft. We do marine operations around the river for special events and rescues and things like that. But this is to purchase a watercraft that was authorized under a grant, which you all authorized under Resolution 2024-758. It was a grant that came through OEM from the Port Security Grant, if you recall from last year.
Anything further, Councilwoman Suara?
Thank you. I just didn't know we have water operations, so just getting that clarification.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting? Motion carries. Moving on to item number 22, Resolution 2025-1373, a resolution authorizing the Metropolitan Department of Law to compromise and settle the property damage claim of Broadway Honky Tonk Venture LLC, DBA Nudies Honky Tonk against the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County in an amount of $35,304, with said amount to be paid out of the self-insured liability fund, sponsored Porterfield. Can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councilwoman Suara.
Thank you, Chair. In looking at this analysis, it said the debris was because of ongoing construction. And so my question is, are we able to identify which construction, which company, and are we able to hold them liable? And if we're not, it says to have come from previous and ongoing construction. And so I wanted to know whether it's our construction or somebody else's construction downtown. I guess that's my question.
That's the one we're on, 22?
24.
Okay. Is there anyone that can speak to that one? Oh, in the back, sorry. You can introduce yourself and you are recognized.
Good afternoon, John Honeysuckle, Metro Water. Councilor Suara, there's a lot of construction that's ongoing in the downtown area. This debris, we couldn't particularly identify it at that time, but with all the construction you have going on in the 2nd Avenue and the Broadway area, that lower corridor, there could have been, it could have come from multiple different angles at that time.
So the next question is that I understand that maybe we're not able to identify which construction. Is this one of the things that we talked to the downtown partnership and the as part of what they're doing in downtown to cover this instead of Metro? Just asking. Legal or whoever is making the settlement.
Is there anyone who wants to speak to that, or Mr. Honeysuckle, do you want to add something?
So Councilor Suara, this particular situation would not be related directly to the downtown partnership engagement. This can happen all over the city, particular where there's a lot of construction that takes place with that. One thing that Metro Water does, they do routine checks with the sewer lines and the water lines, different things like that. Unfortunately, some things do get missed and they will get caught or clogged up in the system. So it's an ongoing particular situation throughout the city that we try to do on a rotating basis to make sure that lines are televised and flushed out to make sure that these type of situations can be avoided. But unfortunately, it doesn't happen always.
Thank you, Mr. Honeysuckle. If there is in any neighborhood and we're able to identify which construction, do we have the option to go after whoever is doing the building at that point, or do we just assume anything that is related to construction. I understand that this one is difficult to tell who did it, but if we're able to narrow it down to it was her that did it, can we go after her?
Absolutely. If we can identify the culprits in any type of situation like this, whether it be on sewer lines, whether it be downtown or within a residential neighborhood, from a constituent location, we absolutely will go directly and look for that person to reimburse the city.
Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting? Motion carries. We need to go back to item 17, Resolution 2025-1368, sponsor Porterfield, resolution authorizing the Metropolitan Department of Law to compromise and settle the claim of Wesley Burney against the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County in the amount of $300,000, with said amount to be paid out of the self-insured liability fund. Can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councilwoman Allen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a big settlement, and my understanding is that the consequence for the officer who drove through a red blinking light was a written reprimand. And I continue to ask this question of when do we decide whether they need driver training or something more robust than a written reprimand for something that is costing us so much?
Deputy Chief Gilder, you're recognized.
Thank you. Yeah, so when I saw the settlement amount, I had the same concern myself. And when I looked at the crash packet, what I discovered was that it was a new officer. He had less than a year on. It was late at night, which is why the red lights were blinking, flashing. If you've ever been out past midnight, you'll see a lot of them are doing that. He was a bit distracted because he was looking for the turn to go to the hospital because he had just suffered an on-duty exposure. And so he had a lot on his mind. Didn't catch the light, and they had the collision. At the time the crash was processed, it was a non-injury property damage crash. So it wasn't until later, I guess, that this injury was discovered and came about. But at the time the supervisors processed the crash, they thought it was a minor, property damage type of incident. And the category of offense, we have a matrix for a first offense. A written reprimand does fall within that matrix. Obviously, if it's more egregious, if an employee is speeding or doing something reckless or not paying attention, then we can move up in the matrix. And we often, if it is something that is a driving issue as far as it requires some additional training, we do frequently require remedial driving training.
Anything additional?
I appreciate that explanation. I hope the officer didn't come down with whatever he was exposed to. So that's helpful to get the context.
Councilman Coopin?
Thank you, Chair, for recognizing me, even though I'm not on the committee. Just kind of a little side question that came up with what you just said. Because obviously those flashing lights, if you're not used to it or used to seeing it, are a little bit confusing. Is there, for new officers, what kind of training do they get on the different timing and lights, and after midnight, keep an eye out for that, and things like that?
Well, I don't know that we get training specific to be aware that the lights will change from flashing or from solids to flashing. I do know that I'd have to go back and look and see where he normally worked. From what I recall from reading the packet that was not the area of town that he was necessarily assigned to. And so I don't think he was expecting the flashing light. And again, from what I read, his mind was a bit distracted. And so he just simply did not catch the flashing light. They do go through extensive driver training and defensive driving courses. And again, if we find that there's some deficiency with that, we have that option and frequently do send officers back for a remedial driving course.
Thank you.
Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting? Motion carries. All right, we are on item number 23. Late filed resolution, sponsors Greg, Cap, Porterfield, Gadd. Resolution approving Amendment 3 to a Transportation Alternatives Program grant from the Tennessee Department of Transportation to the Metropolitan Government, acting by and through the Metropolitan Nashville Parks and Recreation Department to provide funding for the construction of a multimodal path and elevated boardwalk from the Cumberland River pedestrian bridge to the Opry Mills complex. Can I get a motion? Then properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Councilwoman Suara?
Thank you, Chair. Since this was not in the packet, what is the amendment? In the analysis? It's not in the analysis. So what is the amendment?
Director Darby?
The amendment extends the agreement through 2027. Yes, that's what the amendment.
Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting? Motion carries. Moving on to item 24, Bill 2025-906. It's under bills on second reading. An ordinance amending certain sections and subsections of chapters 2.62, 12.56, 13.02, 13.08, 13.20, and 13.32 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws to allow the Nashville Department of Transportation and Multimodal Infrastructure, NDOT, to increase its permit and administrative fees over time as necessary. Sponsors Parker, Porterfield, and Hill. Can I get a motion? Been properly moved and seconded. Councilman Parker, you want to speak to this since you're the lead sponsor? And you have a substitute.
So we gave it a one-meeting deferral in transportation and infrastructure, so it'll be deferred by rule at the meeting.
Councilmember Johnston?
It probably is already. I just wanted to make sure that it's a re-referral back to budget.
If someone could move for a one-meeting deferral with a re-referral back to budget.
I'll move for a one-meeting deferral with a re-referral back to the Budget and Finance Committee, please.
It's been properly moved and seconded for a one-meeting deferral with a re-referral back to the Budget and Finance Committee. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting? Motion carries. All right, excuse me. Item 25, Bill 2025-910, sponsors Porterfield, Hill, and Ewing, an ordinance approving a revocable license agreement between the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, acting by and through the Metropolitan Department of Human Resources in Operation Stand Down, Tennessee, for the use of office space. Can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Councilwoman Evans Siegel.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. With apologies to the licensee here, which is a great organization, and this is the license that I support. I do have some questions about the license itself, which I think those of us who have been digging into the parking garage lease have probably got a lot of similar questions. But I noticed in this license agreement that we didn't have any provisions for, like, if the area was to be destroyed or if there was to be force majeure, and I'm just curious if that's typical in our license form.
Do the person. So we do have someone in the back. If you can introduce yourself and if you can answer that question.
My name is Lisa Kiss. I'm the supervisor for the Office of Veteran Services that is going to be housed, or that is currently housed inside Operation Stand Down. Could you please repeat your question?
Yeah, so typically there would be a provision in here for an event of force majeure and a separate provision in a license if the premise were to be destroyed, what would happen? I didn't see this in this license. It does have a 60-day termination provision, but nothing for like an act of God or destruction. And I was just curious if that's typical for our licenses.
Unfortunately, that is not something I can speak to. I don't know what is typical in it's just a memorandum of understanding saying that we are provided office space at no cost to Metro. I would assume.
Is there someone at the administrative table that can answer? If you can introduce yourself and then respond.
Macy Amos from Metro Legal. I have not personally seen this license agreement before skimming it when this question came up. Typically, for something like this, honestly, I think it would have ordinarily gone through public property and been a lease. I'm not sure what the rationale was for proceeding as a license. I can dig into it tonight and get back to you.
Councilwoman.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I think it makes sense as a license because it is Monday through Friday for a set time period. It's not a full like use of the space 24/7. I think the other questions I would deal with, they provide workers' comp insurance and their certificate of liability, but we haven't asked for it. We haven't actually set insurance limits in this. There's no indemnity provision. So I guess when we do have a license like this, is that something that Metro Legal looks at?
So we don't have a lot of license agreements. I mean, when we're doing a license agreement, it's not typically for something like office space. So I would say that the provisions that are ordinarily in our leases would need to be in something like this. And it does look like at first glance that some of those are missing. We can have those added to the agreement to protect Metro, of course.
So then I guess, sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry. I think that my question is, obviously this is a great organization and I don't want to stop the good work that we're doing with veteran services. Is there a way to sort of continue temporarily allowing the space as needed while we work this out? If we defer this one meeting to figure out these issues, is that going to provide or cause any problems with the use of the space and how we need the space and when we need the space?
No, ma'am, it will not. We've been housed there now since 16, or 18. It will not change. We have a fabulous relationship with them. It will just delay the paperwork.
Okay, with that, I would move that we defer this one meeting.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we have a 1 meeting deferral. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting? Motion carries. Moving on to item number 26, which is our last agenda item before the presentation. Bill 2025-911 sponsors Porterfield and Gamble, an ordinance approving a lease agreement between the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County by and through the Mayor's Office of Emergency Management and the Department of General Services and the Community Resource Center for use of a warehouse at 801 Anderson Lane, Madison, Tennessee, 37115. Can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councilwoman Evans Siegel.
Again, with apologies to our lessee here, which is doing great work. I just have some questions about the lease. I was a little surprised. I guess the first question I have is, we're using this space just to collect donated items. Is that correct? Just want to make sure I know what's going there.
Director Darby.
Yes, so this center is just being used to store donated items. So oftentimes when there's an emergency, like when we had the 2010 flood or a tornado, sometimes items go out there. During COVID-19, the space was used to collect the storage of items that might be utilized for emergencies. Thanks.
Councilwoman Evans Siegel.
Thank you. I think I noticed, if people are dropping stuff off, we have a lot of provisions in here I would expect to see, but for example, under the liability provision, they're not going to be liable for guests and invitees necessarily on their indemnity. I just worry a little bit about this. Is pretty short. And I also didn't see any consideration in the lease. So I'm just wondering what channels this lease went through to get vetted.
Is there anyone that can speak to that? Anyone from the administration table?
Macy Amos from Metro Legal. I thought I saw someone from public property in the hallway. I know that we have had an MOU with the Community Resource Center since 2012. I think this is an ongoing relationship in terms of how we got here back in 2012. Is that your question?
No, my question is just how do we vet the lease? Like, I didn't see any amount for insurance. I didn't see any consideration. I didn't see who's going to be responsible for guests and invitees on the site. And so I'm just curious how did we decide that these were the provisions we needed in this lease to protect ourselves for what could be storing all kinds of various things that we need stored here?
I'm not sure if anyone from General Services or OEM is here.
Let me go real quick because it looks like she has some good information, maybe. Councilwoman Johnston?
Thank you. It's my understanding that this facility, it's not a drop-off facility for anyone to come. The Community Resource Center has their own facility for that. It's in a completely different area of town. This building is actually divided into multiple different areas. And so the fire department stores certain things there, correct? OEM stores certain things there, and then the community center, Community Resource Center stores certain things there. And this particular part of the lease is just for that particular part of the building, which is actually not in great shape. The last time I had a discussion with General Services about it, they were doing some improvements, but there was leaky roofs. There was a huge hole in the ground, like not a joke hole in the ground. A truck could fit into it. And so it's not the greatest space to really to begin with, but Community Resource Center really needs the space. And it's not just for, it is for when we have natural disasters, but it's also for things that they hold and use for special events, whether it be bottled water or tarps or any types of things that we need to respond to any type of need, really. And so just to give it a little bit of context, I know Mark can probably elaborate on that, but that's probably why there's no insurance for guests, because there's no guests on that property.
Let me recognize Mr. Young, and then I'm going to come back to you, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Council Lady. Yes, Mark Young, Nashville Fire and OEM. Council Lady Johnson's described the property pretty well. Only thing I could add is we do have our maintenance division that is housed in this building. If you're not familiar with Anderson Road, the location we're talking about, it's the old Peterbilt building right there at Myatt Drive and Anderson Road. What I understand about the lease with CRC is, like the legal table said, they have been storing stuff there for some time. I had nothing to do with drawing up the lease, so your questions, and maybe your next question is going to ask for maybe a deferral. That would not hurt if you needed to do that and to get some of that cleared up. But yes, it's just letting them use some space that OEM already has an agreement with General Services. So that's what it is.
Councilwoman Evans Siegel?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I think that the information is helpful. I think it doesn't, though, get to the legal questions that I have, which is how much insurance are we requiring them to have in the insurance section? What happens if this building is destroyed and they can't use it? What remedies do they have? Is this actually even a valid lease? Because there is no consideration for this lease. There's not even a consideration statement that suggests that there may be consideration for this lease. So I think given all that, it would be helpful to defer this, since it's not going to hurt the CRC's work, which I don't want to interfere with. They're doing amazing work, but I think we do have to have a valid lease that makes sense. And we are seeing right now, and we'll see over the next several months and years, what happens when we have a bad lease. And I just would like us to not have a bad lease that puts people in bad spots. So I'd like to defer this one meeting and would move to do so.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded to defer one meeting. I saw several hands. Councilwoman Sora on the deferral motion.
I'll just say what I need to say, and then you can put it which bucket it goes to. I'm not against the deferral, but I do want to provide some clarification. I'm very much in support of the CRC and the work that it does. I can say specifically when the Afghan refugee came to town, people that don't have anything at all, CRC was able to get a lot of things to pass on to communities. So where we are not able to help some people, CRC has been able to step in, and that's very important. In terms of the insurance and stuff, this is a building that we have and we're already using, and we have insurance to cover it. I wonder if CRC has an insurance to cover the items inside. So that's the legal piece. I'll let the legal people deal with that. But there are some consideration in here, whether though they're not paying a rental fee, the agreement, if you look at the fiscal analysis, this says that CRC will be responsible for maintenance of any improvement. They'll be responsible for janitorial services. They'll be responsible for personal property taxes and other local, state, and federal taxes. So that is in the analysis as part of what they're responsible for. They're not paying us rent, but they are making some payment towards the use of that building. So I wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Let me get to the two other councilmen, then I'll circle back to you. Councilmember Benedict?
Thank you, Vice Chair, and thanks for recognizing me, even though I'm not on committee.
I guess what I'm hearing from the committee member is that it sounds like and I've noticed this as well, our lease documents oftentimes at the city probably could use some tightening up to protect both the lessee and the government. And so that's to me what I'm hearing from this committee member, both on this resolution and the prior one. So I guess my question would be to the administration is, when you're looking at leases, is there not some representative from the legal team that could take a deep dive and help clean these up so that we, the lessee is equally protected, right? So we want to, these are great partners. We want them to be successful, but we also want to have a lease that protects everybody in it, which is hopefully the goal of everything. So I guess I'm not sure what the answer is there, but that's what I'm hearing. So I wanted to throw that out there for the administration to consider on a go-forward basis. Thanks for letting me talk on committee.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnston. Councilmember Evans Siegel.
Thanks, Vice Chair. I'm not saying we should charge them rent. I just want to clarify that. But there legally must be consideration to have a valid lease. So it's just sort of basic 101 law. And I know I don't want to diminish, again, anything the CRC is doing here. They just happen to unfortunately be the first lease that is on our agenda after we were presented with a massive fire of an underinsured parking garage with a really bad lease. So I think that is, I think that context is helpful. And I think there are things in here, they provide liability insurance for their people, but we don't specify the amount. It's just very common to specify the amount that their own employees would be insured for. So that's the kind of stuff that I think is really basic and there may be consideration in the work that they're doing. It's just not at all clear from this lease what that is.
So we're back on the motion to defer one meeting, which has been properly moved and seconded. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting? Motion carries. And there is, I caught that. There is one more very important item that we have people waiting to hear about. Bills on third reading and public hearing, item number 28. Bill 2025-846, sponsors Coupon, Johnston, Webb, Hancock, and others. An ordinance amending Title II of the Metropolitan Code of Laws authorizing the creation of a downtown central business improvement district and appointing a corporation to act as an advisory board to the district with the necessary powers and authority to carry out the purposes and intent of the district. Can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded. Moving on to discussion, there are several amendments. I will recognize Councilmember Coupon first as the lead sponsor.
Thank you, Chair, for recognizing me even though I'm not on the committee, and thank you for everyone who's come out both in support and opposition and expressed positive and negative about this. I think it's really an important discourse. Obviously, this is the business improvement district that supports our downtown, the core of our city, the core of our state, the economic engine for both. And at the end of the day, this bill is about the 25,000 plus people in downtown Nashville who want to generously give some of their own additional money into a bucket to invest back in our city, of which the entire county gets a return, right? The better downtown is doing, the better the rest of the city does financially. And so people are generously contributing their dollars. There have been a number of questions and concerns that got raised. I'm really appreciative of all the work that's been done to address those concerns. I know we talked about the budget that was supposed to come to the Metro Council. I've actually got an amendment that I would love someone on the committee to move as well, asking for that budget to be given to the council by April 15th of every year so that we can review it, we can see what's money's being spent on and have more oversight and accountability. There's some amendments that I think address some other concerns that we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a little bit. As far as the multimodal concerns that were raised, we have a meeting with the Downtown Partnership, Walk Bike Nashville, and a number of others. Appreciate Councilman Parker advocating for that, and I'm excited to hear Downtown Partnership taking a role in facilitating Connect Downtown and multimodal activation. I think that's going to be a really positive meeting. And then we've heard concerns in the homeless space, and I know that I've got a meeting that I'm pulling together with homeless outreach and advocates in the downtown space. There's some things that I've heard about that can be addressed and can be worked on better, and so I'm committed to do that. And I think with all of these things and anything else that comes up, I've told folks about this process. you know, I'm not going anywhere. The Downtown Partnership's not going anywhere. Like, I'm here to support. I'm here to hear concerns. We're here to work on these issues. But again, at the end of the day, this is about 25,000 residents willing to give their own money. And a vote for this bill is a vote for telling these people we hear them, we appreciate them. And I urge my colleagues to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Coopin. So I'm going to go down and we'll look at each amendment separately. And if I can get someone on the committee to move each one. So on Amendment 1, can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded. Councilmember Parker.
Thank you, Chair, for recognizing me. So what Amendment 1 does is presently the majority of the board members of the District Management Corporation are selected by other board members. And what this amendment would do is provide that those board members, after being selected, would go through the council confirmation process like we do with our boards and commissions. And, you know, I've been having a lot of meetings about Downtown Partnership and the District Management Corporation and how all this stuff works, and kind of beyond the budgetary thing, which I think is already addressed in the code, but I appreciate the lead sponsor's amendment to further clarify and specify when we'll be reviewing the amendment. Just having kind of another touch point with the District Management Corporation as they select their leadership. You know, I've reviewed some of their membership lists, and it's well-respected people in Nashville. Like, I don't think there's going to be like any issues with them, you know, getting through our confirmation process. They're selecting really great folks for the board, but just having that additional oversight and that additional touch point, you know, this is an entity that we do have some oversight of. This is an entity that we have created. There's an entity that manages substantial metro assets for us. And so I think that just having that transparency, that accountability piece of the confirmation process would be a positive step here. So I'd appreciate your support on the amendment.
Councilmember Evans Siegel.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I'm curious, how does the District Management Corporation choose its board members today?
I may be the only person who's read their bylaws in here. They're selected by outgoing members. There's two, they can serve 3-year terms, 2 consecutive, and they select new people as people roll off at their annual meeting.
Councilwoman Evans Siegel.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I think I think this is an interesting amendment in part because I was trying to think of a single quasi-governmental entity in town, which is what I think of the DMC as, because they have tax dollars at their disposal that we collect on their behalf, that doesn't have either direct representation or oversight of direct representation for the governing members. So I think I was trying to think of the whole list of who in some way at some point touches tax dollars, or how we allocate tax dollars, how we offset tax dollars. And you've got MDHA, IDB, HEFB, the Airport Authority, the Sports Authority. I guess now we have East Bank Authority. I'm missing one, the Convention Center. And I think those are our bonding authorities, and they're the ones who in some ways touch our coffers. And they all either, and the council, right? So the council, we're directly elected, but all those others either are elected from people we nominate, or the mayor nominates and we approve, or the mayor directly nominates, or in some cases you have the governor or the speaker. And so there's like a tie to direct representation of allocation of tax dollars. And I think the conclusion I came to here, and I'm just sharing it for my colleagues because I really thought through this one, because I'm a fan of bids because they are a way to get extra tax dollars in a state and a county where it's really hard to come up with extra tax dollars for services that go above and beyond what the whole county needs. And so the whole county doesn't have to subsidize a certain area that they don't directly need those services for. But I was just sort of thinking through this one, and I thought it was an interesting idea, and I ended up thinking positively, and I think I support it because fundamentally what it is it continues to ensure that the bid allocation process is fundamentally democratic, and it is ultimately a tax that residents consent to, but that consent should not be one time. right? Which is why the budget comes back here, which is why I think it makes sense that we would have, we don't select them, we don't, but we do confirm them. And that gives a public voice to the governance of the spending and allocation of that tax dollars in a way that I think puts that on equal level with all of our other sort of spending quasi-governmental like entities.
Councilmember Coopin.
Thank you, and I appreciate my colleagues' depth of thought and analysis on this, and I think these are important conversations to have. I'm hesitant on this one. I think that I understand that quasi-governmental entities have council oversight for confirmations, and the ones that my colleagues listed, to my understanding, are all ones that are Metro created. My understanding of business improvement districts is that we are giving them rights to access certain space, to operate on certain space, but the funding, the direction of the funding is all stakeholder driven, and the idea and what my constituents have said they appreciate about the bid is it's an opportunity for the Metro government to facilitate the taxes that are being collected or the assessments being collected, but it's stakeholder led, they're self-driven, and so I worry about too much. We want to have the right balance of oversight. I think we want to make sure that we're, again, reviewing the budget and looking at it as a whole. But I worry that if we put a political process on what is supposed to be a stakeholder-led process, we may unduly influence it. I know that I've had folks that have not wanted to serve on boards and commissions here in the Metro government because of the scrutiny of a council process. Again, not that there shouldn't be transparency and scrutiny, but I think it introduces another ingredient to it. And again, this is a matter that I was first made aware of this morning at 10 o'clock. And as this is a stakeholder-led bid, it's challenging for me to support something that I haven't had a chance to get my constituents' thoughts on as well. So I'm not supportive of that. I'm open to a conversation perhaps around the mayoral appointment, having council, because that mayor-council relationship exists elsewhere, but I would not be supportive of the rest of the district management corporation being overseen by the council. Oh, and if I could just say one more thing, sorry. It's a lot to cover here. Trying to make sure I get it all in. We also do have oversight on the DMC. It's me, right? The ex officio, the DMC has ex officio District 19 council member, as well as the state rep and state senator over this district. So you do have 3 people on the DMC that have been elected by the constituents that are representing the Metro government and state government in that room at that board. So we already have oversight there. I'd be open to, again, the mayoral piece of it, but the rest of it, I think, is starting to get too deep into the weeds.
Thank you, council member. So in the, just so you know, in the queue, I have Councilwoman Suara, Johnston, Porterfield, and Huffman, now Parker. Councilwoman Suara.
Thank you, Chair. When I saw the amendment, when I read it too, I was conflicted too, because this is a 501c3 organization. And we need to have oversight, which I think we'll be doing with the budget, which we have not. All of us are guilty. We've not been able to perform that duty, but I'm glad that now we're aware and we'll be doing that. So I'm very grateful for that. But there's a part of me that also thinking about community, trust, communication, how people felt about tax dollars. Yes, these are people that decided to tax themselves, but it is still tax dollars. It is still money that is still going to the downtown partnership. And I think that us having more hands in it or more thoughts in it, not just the budget, is not a bad idea. I think for me, I remember all of us may do when we ran and what the perception of people is around how things are managed and what this thing it represents. I think that's what we're trying to do here. We failed to do our job for 21 years. And so in order for us to continue to build that trust, to be able to show that we're doing all that we can do, I don't think this is a bad move at all. We are not appointing those individuals. The appointment will still continue the way that it is right now. All this is saying is that there will be a confirmation. And so it allows us to know, because if something doesn't come across us, we don't even know what's happening. By knowing who is going on the board, that's a way for us to have it in front of us. And so for that reason, I am in support of this amendment. Thank you.
Councilwoman Johnston.
Thank you. My question will be sort of in follow-up to Councilmember Suarez. So if we're going to confirm them, what if we fail to confirm them? And my follow-up question to direct to Metro Legal is, does Metro even have the authority to govern the makeup of a 501c3 governance body? I don't even know. It's one thing to say, hey, we're going to disclose who we are appointing. And I think that's what council members were, I'm putting, not meaning to put words in their mouth, but I'm trying to figure out, because if we don't confirm, so that's my question is, are we okay with just saying, we just want to know who's being appointed and have that disclosed to us when those appointments come through with their own 501c3, or are we imposing our approval on that? And do we, as a metropolitan government, have the authority to do that with a 501c3 Metro Legal?
Metro Legal.
Thanks, Councilmember Macy Amos from Metro Legal. I was just pulling the statute that actually authorizes all of this. It's not specifically laid out that we do have the authority. It also doesn't say that we don't. But the authority doesn't appear to be explicitly given to the council or to Metro. So is that something that we would want to open ourselves up to, or are we okay with just being notified of these appointments? I think is maybe a better question for the transparency of it, to Councilmember Suarez's point. So I think that Metro Legal would be comfortable with just the notification. I'll defer to your own legal counsel about going above and beyond the current arrangement.
Director Darby.
So state law that governs the creation of the CBID does not specifically outline what the makeup of the district management corporation looks like. But for years, we have done that. So we specifically say what types of person will serve on the DMC. So you have to have a certain number of people from, large property owners. You have condo tenants. You have residents. And everybody has to be a property owner within the district in order to serve on the DMC. And so this legislation continues to put that forward. By the same token, we also say how these members are going to be chosen. That's not something that's provided in state law. We are doing that ourselves. So this particular amendment to the legislation as filed would be taking it one step further by saying not only DMC will you choose your members in this way, but once you select them, then the council would confirm.
So have we had any issues prior? I mean, the downtown partnership is not new. Have we had issues with appointees that serve in this capacity before? Are we, and then also the question is, what happens when and if there's an appointment made, but a confirmation fails? I don't know, if there's no specific authority for us to do that, or do we create a problem there where maybe they're serving and maybe they're not? I don't know. I mean, here within our other boards and commissions within Metro, we know what happens then. But what happens in this one where we're talking about a completely separate 501c3? And does that need to be, before we do this, does that need to be articulated in black and white so that we don't create a problem there?
The language in the amendment doesn't specify what happens if a confirmation fails. I think that presumably if the confirmation were to fail, the District Management Corporation Board would select another person and present that person. They would have to fit the same qualifications that are outlined for whatever position it is that needs to be filled.
So I'm going to oppose this amendment. I think we already impose parameters around which these appointees have to be made. This is a voluntary, this is the district's own will to be taxed for these extra services. We've never had a problem with it before. I don't have a problem with transparency, letting us know who they are. But I just think we're getting into, this is like a cog in the wheel at some point. So I'll be opposing.
Thank you, Councilmember. Director Darby, did you want to?
I just wanted to make sure that we are clear when we're talking about the District Management Corporation, that is not the Downtown Partnership. The District Management Corporation contracts with the Downtown Partnership to provide services.
All right, next on the list is Chair Porterfield.
Thank you, Vice Chair. You're doing such an amazing job up there, and you look fabulous doing it, so thank you. I'm standing in support of this, and really robust conversation, and thank you everyone for opining on it. And I definitely sympathize with the district council member and understand the concerns that he is lifting up. These are taxpayer dollars, and I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we are being diligent with how taxpayer dollars are being spent. And Councilmember Parker's amendment here, we're not changing the criteria of who's being appointed. We're not saying who can and cannot be appointed. We're just doing that confirmation process. So if there is something that comes through, like any other board or commission, similarly speaking, if there's a concern, we do have the ability to reject a confirmation. That is a part of the process. These are actual taxpayer dollars. Taxpayer dollars are spent by the Metro Council. Taxpayer dollars are spent by the school board. Now we are having another entity spending taxpayer dollars. And I think that this is a great way to give some, a little bit of oversight, a little bit of community voice for this. When you are going through government processes, there are government processes to go through. If you don't want to go through a government process, don't go through the government process. Collect your money a different way. That is not taxpayer dollars. But because they are, then we're saying that we would like them to be subjected to this process. So thank you, Councilmember Parker, for bringing this amendment, and I stand in strong support.
Councilmember Huffman.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief in my comments on this. I'm worried that this creates an override to the will of the people. As Councilmember Coupin said, as Councilmember Johnston said, it really concerns me that we would want to do that. Number one, just because, as Councilmember Coupin said, he sits on there along with the state representative for that area, Representative Bain. Just wanted to also point out that I've got some concerns about the precedent that this sets for other business improvement districts. We've got the South Nashville Central Improvement District right now. How does this apply to that? Does it open it up? Any other future business improvement districts? You know, the Donaldson Hermitage community is growing like crazy. So is Madison. What if one of our areas wanted to do that? I think it's a slippery slope here. We just need to be careful. Thank you.
Councilmember Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I just want folks to maybe just keep some perspective on what we're actually talking about here. I mean, this is a process where folks come in and they do a couple of minutes interview with the Rules Committee, and then 95% of these appointments are unanimous on this floor. So I don't see this as a slippery slope. I don't see it as a slippery slope to what? Oversight? We've been lacking in the oversight space here for 21 years, I believe. We haven't been reviewing their budgets and approving their budgets as we're supposed to. This amendment is an effort to kind of get us back on the right track, have more touch points between this entity and with Metro, and I would just ask colleagues to please support it.
Councilmember Coupin.
Thank you, Chair. And again, appreciate all of this robust discussion and very deeply appreciate and respect my colleagues who are sharing both in support and opposition. I want to clarify a couple things, and I know these are kind of semantics, but I think they're important. I don't feel like this is taxpayer dollars. I think the way I look at taxpayer dollars is we as a metro government create a levy, we create a number, we assess people that number, and they pay it into our bucket, and then we decide how that's allocated. A bid is effectively like a mini metro government, right? We are giving them authority, the same way the state gives us authority as a city to operate. We're giving them authority to operate as a mini government, if you will. Yes, we're facilitating the funds the same way the state facilitates funds to us. But it's willingly given, and it could be willingly taken away. 50% plus one of the property owners tomorrow could show up and kill this whole thing, and we've just lost $8 million of revenue in our downtown core, right? So this is stakeholder money. They decide the rate, they decide when to do it and when to stop it. So I think I appreciate the semantics, but to me this is not taxpayer dollars that we have a right to, because they're willingly giving it and they could willingly not give it. My understanding is that while the nominations happen from outgoing board members, my understanding is that the vote on them is a 50% plus one vote of those present at the annual Downtown Partnership bid meeting. So this is not just some random appointees that just self-appoint and that's it and there's no oversight. The oversight is the stakeholders. And apologies if I'm getting a little intense about this, but I'm starting to feel a little mama bear protective over my district and my constituents who it feels, almost offensive to them that we're saying as a metro government, you're nominating people, you're voting by the majority that you want these people, and we're not so confident you know what you're doing, and so we're going to have another layer. And again, like I said, I'm open to the oversight. If the mayor's picking someone and that's another metro representative, the council wants oversight there, I'm okay with that. But to say, I mean, again, kind of my question becomes what happens if someone's nominated, the majority of downtown stakeholders say, we want this person to represent us on the District Management Corporation, and the Metro Council says, sorry, no thank you, right? I think the slippery slope, not to oversight, we should have plenty of oversight. That's really important. I think the oversight is you have a district council member, a state rep, and a state senator all sitting on this board, arguably 3 independent people who got elected independently to represent different constituencies. So there's plenty of people on these boards. I just think it's important to allow the process to play out and allow the constituents who are putting this money in to have some control over who gets to do it. So again, I appreciate the discussion. I understand this is difficult. There's a lot of different pieces moving around right now, but I really can't support that piece of it.
All right, I have in the queue Councilmember Porterfield, Benedict, Evans, Siegel, and Webb. Chair Porterfield.
Thank you so very much, Vice Chair. This is a question for either the administration, Director Darby, or whoever can answer this. The individuals that are paying this money, how are they paying these dollars? How is it physically collected?
The state law requires that the funds be collected at the same time as tax funds. So it gets paid when they pay their taxes.
So when they pay their taxes, how are they paying these non-tax dollars? Are we passing around an offering plate? Are people voluntarily walking up and going to a machine and putting in some money? How are we actually collecting this revenue?
The revenue comes through the trustee. They pay it through the trustee. Those funds come into the Metro coffers, and then they are budgeted. They go into a special revenue fund that is dedicated just for this CBID, and then they are used for that CBID. But it is a special assessment that is set by this ordinance or the previous ordinances. The previous ordinances were all brought in by petition of the members of the CBID area.
Thank you, Director Darby. So while it is a voluntary tax, it still sounds like a tax, and it still sounds like tax dollars, which means that it's incumbent upon us to have some type of oversight. So again, I stand in support of Councilmember Parker's amendment. My next question is, it was mentioned about the majority of the downtown stakeholders. Are we talking about the roughly, I don't know, is it 20,000 residents, however many residents are in this particular council district? Is there some type of vote that they are doing to say that this is who they want to serve on this committee, or who is making the decision of who's serving on it? I'm trying to understand who the majority of downtown stakeholders are.
So
Go ahead, Director Darby, go ahead.
be
I was
recognized.
looking at you.
All right, just want to make sure I'm recognized. When the initial, according to the ordinance, when the initial DMC is authorized pursuant to this ordinance, the outgoing members of the DMC will appoint the incoming members of the DMC, will select those people. And then those members are voted on by the property owners in the DMC. In the CBID, forgive me.
Okay, thank you, Director Darby. And I would go back to what Councilmember Parker stated when he stated the vast majority of the people that come before us are approved. It's very rare that the council does not approve someone coming before us, but it does give us the opportunity to have some oversight, to have an additional layer of vetting in this process. So I stand in support with Councilmember Parker's amendment, and I don't know that I could support this legislation without the amendment. I don't know if I'm supporting the legislation either way at this point, but for this particular moment, I definitely won't be supporting it without the amendment. Thank you.
Councilmember Benedict.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I'll make this quick because I'm not on this committee, but one point that hasn't been brought up yet is out in the districts, people want to know what's going on downtown. People feel out in the districts that they're paying for things downtown and they're not, and we don't have oversight to that. So by virtue of us having approval of a couple of candidates on this, I think that helps us say we are giving more oversight to this than what we've done in the past. So I would encourage support of it. And again, I appreciate you allowing me to speak even though I'm not on committee.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilwoman Webb.
Thank you for your recognition. Okay, so the District Management Corporation is a 501(c), right?
It's
Director Darby.
It is organized under the Title 48 for nonprofit organizations.
Okay, so I'm just trying to think here, if they're that and we think we can approve their board members, what gives us not the right to do other 501(c) board members for the county?
Director Darby.
State law specifically allows us to authorize the organization of this particular downtown management corporation, which is what we're doing through this ordinance. And so by authorizing the creation of the district management corporation, we have put in, and we have been doing this for years, even with the current district management corporation, we have put in some requirements for specific types of seats on that board, and we have put in requirements by ordinance for how those board members are selected.
And I understand that, and I'm good with the mayor, you know, if we confirm the mayors, but the other one, I think that is the slippery slope that we're going down right there on how much control we're going to have. Second of all, is there any other bids in the city that we could apply, that we would be applying this to, or is this the only one?
Director Darby.
This particular CBID is the downtown CBID. The ordinance that we're considering today and tomorrow will be authorizing the downtown CBID and the Gulch CBID to combine as of January 1, 2027. So this is authorizing the continuation of the Gulch CBID. So ostensibly, this would apply to the Gulch CBID eventually because they will become part of the downtown CBID.
And that's the only ones we have?
We also have the South Nashville CBID, but that is organized under a separate section of code, just like the Gulch CBID currently is organized under a separate section of code.
But what would keep us from not approving their board if it's, even though it's the same, I'm assuming they're a 501(c)(2)?
I have not looked at the SONA CBID in a really long time,
Okay.
but I would assume that the District Management Corporation of the SONA CBID is also organized in the same manner, but I haven't looked at it for the specifics.
Okay, I agree with Ruffle. I think this is a slippery slope for that reason, and I don't think we can do it for one and not do it for all. So I'm totally opposed to this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Suara.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make one clarification. I think I'd mentioned that it's a 501c3. It is not a 501c3, but it is a non-for-profit organized under the IRS section, another code of the IRS section, but it's not a 501c3. So just wanted to clarify that. But it's still a non-for-profit.
Councilmember Ellis.
Thank you for recognizing me. I just came really for the disparity study, but since some of my constituents are watching, I want to be sure and let them know that I'm in support of this because I don't want to have, the limited resources that our metro departments have to spend on our district to go to downtown. So if downtown folks that live in the high rises and the folks that run the businesses want to add extra money to pay for their services, then I'm going to let them do it.
Councilmember Spain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this question about whether or not we're talking about tax revenue or not is very important. So I just have one more quick question for Director Darby. How does the state law that authorizes the creation of the bid and the collection of these revenues, how does it refer to these funds that we're collecting?
Director Darby.
They are not considered tax revenue in the commonly accepted parlance of tax revenue, but they are, the state law specifically calls this a self-financing district. And there is case law out there about CBID specifically where it's a case out of Memphis where the property owners in the CBID sued the city for the assessment of a tax, and the court found that it is not a tax, it is indeed a special assessment, essentially.
So just to make sure I understand that, so under state law and under court decisions, these funds are not considered tax collections?
That is correct. They are not considered a tax. They would be considered a special assessment.
Thank you. And then if I may, one other question. My understanding is that this board includes appointments by the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker of the House. Do we have the authority to approve or not approve those appointments?
Director Darby.
The amendment that is being discussed today specifically excludes those positions from approval by confirmation.
Thank you.
Councilmember Evan Siegel, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Vice Chair. I just want to clarify a couple of things. I think I have a little bit of background on the South Nashville bid as well. That there is a difference between this bid and that bid, and that bid is not coming before us asking to be expanded. So the only reason that we have the ability to have this discussion is because the bid would like to grow into another bid. So there's no slippery slope in that we're suddenly going to go out and start doing this over and over again. That bid is also unique from this bid in that it paid for infrastructure cost that were desperately needed in South Nashville and doesn't provide like the level of sort of day in, day out services that these bids provide. Both bids, I think are great tools for areas that have special needs. But the one thing I kind of keep hearing that I think I find a little bothersome is this idea of voluntary, because my understanding of this is that property owners opt in, not 100%. There is a threshold and it depends on the way in which they do it. And if a certain number, I believe it's like more than 30% potentially object, then it can't be formed. Like there are all kinds of, the statute's convoluted. There are multiple ways to form it, multiple ways to object. It is not 100% opt-in. And I think what's really important to remember too is it is not voluntary once it exists. There's no way for me to say move from District 18 to District to a place in District 19 in the bid and say, screw this, like I don't want to pay these assessments, I don't care for these services. Like as a resident, anybody there, as property owner, anybody there is going to be paying this once it is established. So that is why this is voluntary to form, but it is not an ongoing voluntary entity in that sense. And it is providing services that government would typically provide and operates as if it were a government in many ways.
All right, any additional discussion on Amendment 105? Hearing none, I'm going to ask that committee members raise their hands because I know there's going to be some not just yes, but some no's as well. So we do have a motion on the floor to approve Amendment 1. It's been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor, if you could raise your hand. All those opposed, if you could raise your hand. That's it. So. Any not voting? All right, so the recommendation coming out of the committee for amendment number 1 is to not approve amendment number 1. So the motion for approval fails. 3 in favor, 8 against. All right, moving on to amendment number 2. Can I get a motion? Can I get a, been properly moved and seconded to approve amendment number 2. Moving on to discussion, Councilmember Coopin, do you want to talk about your amendment?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and for recognizing me, even though I'm not on the committee, and a little break from the discussion for hopefully a fairly easy one. The conversation come up wanting to have, we know that the reporting requirement has been in the code. We understand that it sounds like maybe it was going to finance and not getting to us, or there was some confusion as to where it was going or how it was getting here. Obviously, we can't go back, but going forward, we've been reassured that we are going to get that report. We are going to be able to vote on it. And I wanted to have a specific date so there was no uncertainty as to when we should have that report on our desks. So this amendment does provide that specific date for that report.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I do have a question. Director Darby, can you tell us what is required by the code in terms of what the report should include?
Yes, the code requires that the budget, an annual budget for the DMC be submitted to the council for approval annually, and also for financial reports to be submitted to the council.
And so I know in our annual budget, we do have a line item for the downtown partnership. And then there's also a budget page in the budget book like we do for every other department. So is that not sufficient that it's included in the budget ordinance? Or are we supposed to be approving it separately?
I've spent a lot of time doing some legislative research on this, more time than I've cared to admit to. But it looks to me like at some point in 2003, 2004, the budget stopped being submitted to the council for approval. The specific budget from the Downtown Management Corporation stopped being submitted to the council for approval. Around that same time, council approved an MOA with Metro and the downtown, the District Management Corporation. And in that document, it says specifically that the DMC will submit their budget and annual reports, and I think it also required some monthly reports, but that it would submit those to the council, but first to the Department of Finance. After that, I cannot find any legislative documentation that kind of demonstrates what happened, so it's up to everybody to kind of guess what happened, but I think that because that information was coming to the finance department, was being put into the annual budget. It goes through, there's a couple of line items in the annual budget and the special revenue fund sections that specifically identify the revenue and make the appropriation that is approved by council on an annual basis, that was at some point deemed sufficient. Whether or not it actually is sufficient is a question for the council to decide, but I think that is what has transpired over the years.
Any additional discussion on Amendment 2? I see Councilmember Coopin and Councilmember Suara.
Thank you, Chair. Just real quick, if you are so intrigued to go see what it used to look like, if you go back in Legistar back to like the 2003, you can see how it was presented previously to the council. I believe it was a resolution with the budget on it and descriptions and things like that. So there is, if people are curious how that used to look and how it might look in the future, that's in there.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Suara.
Thank you, and I'll make it very short. Thank you, Councilmember Coopin, for the amendment. I think it was troubling that we missed it, and a lot of I personally felt like, how did we miss this? And so, not to belabor it. And I think from the conversation that I heard, we cannot put all of it actually on the downtown partnership. Honestly, I think it's within us, Finance Council, Metro, that we dropped the ball there. So I'm glad that we're correcting that, and we have the opportunity to continue to do that.
Any additional discussion on Amendment 2? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting? Have one not voting. So motion carries. Oh. No, it was over here. Councilwoman Porterfield. Okay. So motion carries. All right, moving on to amendment number 3. Can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded to approve amendment number 3. Councilmember Prepteet, you want to talk about your amendment?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Yes, so, and thank you for recognizing me, though I'm not on this committee. What this amendment does, it establishes reporting requirements, particularly as it relates to the use of security forces or security officers within the CBID. It provides for particular qualitative and quantitative data to be included in the report that would be submitted to the council as a whole no later than March 30th of each year, as well as requiring a presentation to the Public Health and Safety Committee no later than April 30th. Happy to answer more questions on that, but that's just generally what this amendment does, and would appreciate y'all's support.
All right. Any discussion on Amendment 3? And I do want to make sure, because I see folks who represent the Downtown Partnership, that they are understanding what this amendment does. If someone wants to come to the mic, or Councilmember Coopin, if you want to speak.
Either way, do you want to?
Thank you, Madam Chair, temporarily. We received this morning. We read it. There's some things in there that that will require, let's say, best effort, because we don't control all the data that might be out there. But it's a reporting mechanism. I think that while it's extra effort, it's not a overly burdensome add-on, and I think as we're using our best effort to collect that data, a lot of it, which we have related to our outreach team and their interactions, adding that to safety, I think is it's not overly burdensome, I guess, summary.
Thank you. Councilmember Coopin.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll try to be quick. But I'm supportive of this as well. I appreciate my colleague bringing it. I think that having the data clearly quantified is really important. He was very comprehensive in the data that's being included, so I do appreciate that. I just want to let my colleagues know that I do support this this amendment.
Thank you. Any additional discussion? All those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting? Motion carries. All right, amendment number 4, can I get a motion? Been properly moved and seconded. Councilmember Prepteet, you want to talk about your amendment?
Yes, thank you again, Madam Vice Chair. So what this particular amendment does is it requires that the CBID create an internal grievance process or grievance mechanism through which members of the public can provide feedback or let their grievances be known, and ask that there be some kind of internal mechanism through which those grievances or feedback can be assessed, whether it be establishing, establishing particular tiers or levels of grievances, but relatively broad language, just simply asking that there be some public-facing mechanism through which folks can provide feedback and file grievances that would be publicly available. And again, I'd be happy to answer further questions on this amendment, and would appreciate your all support.
Councilmember Gamble.
Thank you, Chair. One question for the sponsor, and I appreciate all of the efforts to make this a transparent and open process. My question about the grievance, would that option or policy be available to the entire county, or would it just be to the members of the downtown partnership?
Councilmember Prep-Teague.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Yes, so this entire grievance process would be public facing, so it'd be something that would be available to all folks across the county. Again, though it's available, the expectation is not that they would adjudicate grievances across the entirety of the county, just really particular to any instances or anything that happens within the CBID, but it is something that would be publicly facing and publicly available.
Okay, I guess I would like to hear from Downtown Partnership on if that is opening up a liability outside of the membership, or if you feel that this is something that you all can manage and maintain within the district, downtown district.
And if you could introduce yourself, I didn't ask you that last time.
Okay, I'm Tom Turner with the Nashville Downtown Partnership, District 25 resident and voter. We read the grievance amendment. I think that the councilman recognized that it would be something new and that requires a comeback within 4 months. And from what we look at it, it's something that we could place on the website with a form where people could fill that out. Also, they could mail it in as well, because I believe there's an anonymous option. And I think we open that up and work on setting a process over the next several months, and then come back to the committee, which I believe was what was requested there. So it's new, but it's also appears workable.
Councilmember Prep-Teague, and then Councilmember Coopin.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And just wanted to lay out that within this amendment, there's not going to be an expectation that they'll adjudicate grievances that don't pertain to the CBID. So even though it is publicly available across the county, the expectation is purely just any instance or any grievance that is relevant to any instance that occurs within the CBID.
Councilmember Coopin.
Thank you, Chair. Couple quick questions. First of all, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the sponsor's intent, because I think the language may be saying something different or maybe the same. The way I read it is that this would be only focused on interactions between private security affiliated with the downtown CBID and members of the public. Is the intention to have it just be on that section, or is it any grievance? Just want to better understand what the sponsor was trying to achieve here.
Councilmember Prep-Teague.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Yeah, so most definitely, grievances as it relates to the use of security forces is obviously encompassed within this, and is one of the things that was taken into consideration when drafting this amendment. But obviously can include other kinds of grievances. Obviously, if the grievance is something that doesn't necessarily rise to the level of needing to be adjudicated, that's the enabling language in this. I intentionally wanted to be broad to allow for the CBID to be able to carve out and create this grievance process that is particularly geared towards and accomplishing the needs of the CBID. So yeah, that's the purpose behind this amendment.
Thank you. Can I ask Special Counsel Darby to weigh in on the wording? I just want to make, again, not coming in adversarially. I want to make sure that what's set in here is what is expected, so we can deliver back what the sponsor wants.
Director Darby.
I read it to mean that the grievances are specific to the interactions between private security personnel affiliated with the downtown CBID and members of the public. That is the scope of the grievance process.
Councilmember Coopin.
One last question. So it says that the grievances should be publicly available. There's also an option for anonymous grievances. I guess my other question would be, is under this, I guess back to Special Counsel Darby, under this legislation, is the downtown partnership obligated to publish every single grievance that comes in, or do they just have to publish substantiated ones, or, you know, where's that line between someone making something random up versus an actual grievance that does need to be addressed?
Director Darby?
Sorry, it would appear that the records that have to be maintained are of the grievances and the resolution of any of the grievances. If the DMC is able to create a system whereby someone can submit online an anonymous grievance, then that would be part of the record.
Councilmember Coopin, anything else?
Just want to say that I don't love this one, just because it seems like there's some technicalities and some issues that we're going to bump into with it, but also not opposed to it. Again, I think that transparency and the opportunity for the public to weigh in is fine by me. So don't love it. I know I got it at 10 o'clock this morning, so I didn't have a lot of time to digest it, but kind of neutral on this one.
Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of amendment number 4, say aye. Any opposed, no. Any not voting? 1 not voting. So motion carries. On to amendment number 5. Can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded to approve amendment number 5. Councilmember Benedict, you want to talk about your amendment?
Yep, thank you, Vice Chair. So a lot of us here, and I know the downtown, hear about from residents and downtown business owners and even tourists that are unhoused population in downtown Nashville, people wanted addressed. And so I had hoped to include an amendment to dedicate some percentage of the CBID's revenue to housing support, things like rental assistant, permanent rental assistance, permanent supportive housing, and eviction prevention. Since then, I've legally found out that we can't do this under state law, but I wanted to bring the amendment to the committee today because I think that doesn't mean that the business and property owners in the district couldn't choose to do this themselves. So the CBID is going to bring new resources and new influence, and I hope that those involved will consider using some of that to help tackle the housing instability downtown. As we know, a thriving district depends on stable homes. So although we can't require it, we certainly can encourage it. And so I'd like to withdraw. And I will not be moving this forward tomorrow night. And I'm not on committee, so I can't withdraw, but.
It's already been moved. Who moved it? Councilmember Johnston?
I think I moved it, so I'll withdraw.
Thank you. Councilwoman Suara?
Thank you for recognizing me. I was going to move the withdrawal, but before we end, I would like Mr. Turner, if that's still okay. When we had the homeless issues happening downtown, we saw the news report. I had the same idea that Councilmember Benedict had, because even when we're helping people that are on the street, it's a revolving door. And so the only way to end homelessness is through housing. And so I appreciate that. I had that conversation originally with them, but and I think we discussed it at one budget meeting. I wanted you to, if you can speak, one of the reasons why I didn't bring something like that is they did something during COVID and they're committed to doing more stuff. And I wanted that on record so that even like you said, we cannot mandate. I think it's very important. The homelessness and housing issue is going to require all of us. And so I just want Mr. Turner, based on our conversation, to at least speak to the commitment of the downtown partnership on what you've done before and what you're committed to do in the future.
Mr. Turner, you're recognized.
Great. Thank you. Our homeless outreach program started in 2011. So 14 years, we've grown from one person doing outreach to 4. The 4th one just started July 1st. You heard from the 2nd one, who started last year. He spoke earlier at the meeting. But in 2011 and going forward, we interacted with individuals throughout the district One of these most significant barriers was getting people to yes on the assistance side. Initially, we looked at and partnered with Room in the Inn and Rescue Mission and others, where we would do hotel rooms as we were waiting for housing to become available, just related to the timing. And then transition from that to actually providing some apartments over time. And we did that really until COVID began. When COVID began and there was money available for housing that came through the federal government and was passed down, at that point was when we added additional outreach workers. So we had one before that. So we added outreach workers, housing became more, I mean, it doesn't sound like it makes a lot of sense, but housing became more readily available at that point in time. If you can remember back to the beginning of COVID and then in 21, 22. And so we added outreach workers, decreased the housing component. Right now it's 4 outreach workers. We know that the economy goes up and down, the availability of housing goes down, where it's available, how much, who has access, whether it's through additional federal vouchers, state vouchers, or the VASH, the VA vouchers as well. So it's, I think as we get to the point where housing is more of a burden to get people to go from the street into housing, we'll probably look at changing that again. And I think we're going to be able to adjust to the supply and demand of individuals seeking and accepting housing over time. So I wouldn't say we're going to do it tomorrow, but I wouldn't rule it out in the future because we've done it in the past, and I think we're just responding to the market.
Councilmember Suarez.
Thank you so much. So going forward, is there a commitment? Because I think it's very critical. The housing piece is very important. And we know that by doing that, you're helping the people in the district as well. So I appreciate what's done in the past. And since we cannot mandate you, is there a commitment to put a percentage or to do something towards housing going forward? And that can be reported as part of the report that we get.
I don't think we'll reduce our investment in outreach services and as a total and related to housing services. Keep in mind, more than half of the homeless in Davidson County are downtown. We provide 4 outreach workers downtown. Metropolitan government of Davidson County provides 9 for the entire county. So the county has a budget of $3 billion. They're providing 9. We're talking about an $8 million budget, and we're providing 4. I think there's a significant disparity in allocation of resources related to homeless services. So we will continue at the pace that we're investing now. And if we are looking at reducing an outreach worker to add homelessness, that'll be a decision that we have to make in the future. But I'm not, I don't think I'm able to commit the board into where they would allocate their resources at this point. But we will present the information to them that we think best serves the community.
Okay. Councilmember Coopin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for hanging out here. I know it's a long time for this. Well, as a district management ex officio board member, I can commit that to what Councilman Suarez is saying, not to commit to the allocation directly, but to bring this up, to elevate this. I think this is something we've been talking about. I've candidly learned a lot about bid structure and which piece fits where throughout this process as well. So that's something I'll commit to elevating and advocating and bringing Councilman Benedict's amendment and this conversation to the district board. Representative Afton Bain, not to commit her, but I imagine she would be on board with that as well. I imagine Senator Yarborough would, and knowing the other district management board members. Again, I can't commit spending or finances, but we can commit to having that conversation and making that a priority. Thank you.
All right, committee members, we're back on the bill as amended. Can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded to approve Bill 2025-846 as amended with Amendment 2, 3, and 4. Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Evans Siegel.
Sorry, Vice Chair. I just wanted to say one thing that throughout this process, the DMC, I've had a lot of conversations with them around traffic and parking, Connect Downtown, and I just want to let the members know that they have been very open and collaborative in that process in looking to get some of our high priority bike lanes, which are downtown, but are required for the entire county to have access across downtown because you cannot get from any part of this town to another without going through downtown. And I am looking forward to continuing in that process. But I know there's been a lot of public questions about that, particularly given what happened on 9th Avenue. And so there are active conversations about 7th and Demumbrian and other places in downtown, which I think hopefully in the next few months we'll see some good progress on.
Is there any other additional conversation? Hearing none, all those in favor of Bill 2025-846 as amended, say aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting? We have one not voting. So the bill passes as amended. All right, that is the last legislative item, but we do have a presentation from Griffin and Strong, a disparity study presentation. So I would encourage committee members to stick around, and I know members of the Minority Caucus were also invited to hear this presentation.
All right, thank you so much, and thank you, Vice Chair Toombs, for handling the first leg of the meeting. And now we'll go ahead and go to the presentation. I will go ahead and recognize you all. If you could introduce yourselves, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Rodney Strong. I'm the CEO of Griffin and Strong, and I have the team here that did the bulk of the work on the study. David Maher, who was our legal partner, who did a lot of the policy work on this study. Michelle Clark Jenkins, who is responsible for all of our methodology, and then our project manager, and Trinity Williams. And so we have the entire team here, and I just want to move forward with our presentation. Trinity, if you'll move forward. So just want to tell you a little bit about Griffin and Strong, then we want to talk about the objective and purpose of the study. I want to talk a little bit, and David is going to spend some time talking about the current legal environment. Michelle is going to talk about the methodology and technical approach. Then we're going to have some discussion about our findings, our commendations, recommendations, and then we're going to be open for questions and answers. So our firm specializes in procurement research, training, supplier diversity, consulting, contract compliance, program management. We've been involved with Metro Nashville government since 2003. So 22 years that we work with Metro Nashville government in various capacities. And we've got a really strong team, 7 lawyers, 2 PhDs in economics, a PhD in social psychology, a PhD in anthropology. So we've got a very detailed analysis And without further ado, I'm going to turn over to David Maher, who is going to go into more depth about the objective and purpose of the study, and then about our legal analysis and our policy results.
All right. Thank you, Attorney Strong. As indicated on the slide, a disparity study is really an objective research tool that is used to determine whether a procurement program or procurement activities have a disparate impact on certain races, ethnicities, or gender groups in certain identified industry categories. Then it further questions and demonstrates whether those disparities are statistically significant, and we'll get into that in a minute, and likely caused by the race and gender status of firm owners. And that's done through a different statistical analysis as well. So disparity studies utilize anecdotal evidence and a review of the agency's policies, practices, and procedures, as well as best practices to make some recommendations. And we've done that here, and we'll be covering those in just a few minutes. Those recommendations by law must be narrowly tailored to fit the findings of the study, meaning that they need to fit the actual disparities seen in the race, ethnicity, or gender groups and the industry categories. They need to be narrowly tailored to address those statistically significant disparities that are found as part of the study. So one of the core questions that we ask at the beginning is, why do we do disparity studies? And the short answer is that disparity studies are intended to inform or to form a factual basis for a remedial contracting program where disparity is found. And the cases that you see here, the City of Richmond versus J.A. Croson and Adirondack Constructors versus Pena, were the United States Supreme Court's declaration that in order to have a remedial contracting program that has a race-based or race-conscious element, it needs to pass what they call strict constitutional scrutiny. And this started with the Croson case in 1989 and established that there are two pieces to the strict scrutiny test. The first is that you must have a compelling governmental interest that is supported by a strong basis in evidence. And secondly, as I indicated in the previous slide, any remedial program needs to be narrowly tailored to avoid over-inclusion or under-inclusion. And since 1989, the federal courts have established different methodological requirements that are dictated by the case law and that we have introduced into our study methodology. Shortly after the study for Metro Nashville was completed, the United States Supreme Court issued its opinion in Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard. This was a case not involving procurement, but instead was addressing affirmative action in higher education. And there the court criticized the use of diversity or student diversity as the offered governmental interest or compelling governmental interest. The court also found that there was an inability to properly measure the disparity or the diversity efforts that the colleges were trying to make, and therefore found that it was contrasting from Croson. It was not sufficiently measurable, was not a sufficient compelling state interest, and therefore was struck down. Again, we maintain that, again, affirmative action in higher education is very different than affirmative action in procurement and remedial actions based on the Croson case. Also, we have up here the Mid-America Milling Company case, which is in the Eastern District of Kentucky. Has been discussed in the media quite a bit. Essentially, there was an injunction providing that they could no longer use the presumption of disadvantage in the federal DBE program. That was a preliminary ruling. That case is still ongoing, and there is some question as to whether or not it's going to continue under the new administration. Next slide. Finally, we have been following along both with the executive orders at the federal level and, of course, Tennessee's recent Senate Bill 1084 to see what effect, if any, it would have on the procurement activities of Metro Nashville.
All right, thank you, David. So I'll be discussing a little bit about our technical approach that we took for the study. So we started the study by conducting a legal analysis, and David here, he looked at the relevant case law, as he mentioned before. We also did a deep dive into the purchasing policies and procedures. We conducted policy interviews with various staffs just to get an understanding of how the staff understands their policies and if there are any discrepancies between the two. We also collected and cleaned data. We started the study by doing various data assessment meetings, just meeting with staff to really understand how the data is kept before we begin the analyses. We also conducted a relevant market analysis, which we'll hit on a little bit later. We conducted a utilization analysis, and this is really where we look to see and assess where Metro Nashville utilizes firms, what firms are being used. We conducted an availability analysis, looking at the ready, willing, and able firms. Disparity analysis, this is really where we compare utilization with availability just to see if any gaps exist. We also conducted a regression analysis within the marketplace. We collected anecdotal evidence in multiple ways. We did an informational meeting. We also did multiple public hearings throughout the study. We did organizational interviews, focus group sessions. We collected anecdotes from our study website, email comments, and we also did a survey of business owners. And then we had a final report with recommendations, which we'll go through. So here are our study parameters. So we had a 5-year study period, July 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2022. And we, our analysis was within these 5 industry categories. So we had construction, A&E, professional services, other services, and goods. So going back to the relevant market analysis, so for this analysis, we were really looking at where Metro Nashville spent the bulk of its dollars, specifically looking at where Metro spent at least 75% of its dollars to help determine what the relevant geographic market area was for the study. And again, we looked within that study period mentioned before. And so we found that Metro Nashville's relevant geographic market area was the Nashville, Davidson, Murfreesboro, Franklin MSA, which consists of about 13 counties. And within those counties, the spend is here. In total, it was 79%, with the highest being in A&E at 87.9%.
So as Trinity said, once we determine that relevant market, and the reason we determine a relevant market is because we have to determine where the firm's located that we're going to study. You know, are they just in the Metro Nashville area? Or do they spread out? So that's why we do this relevant market analysis, because it tells us what your economic marketplace is. Where are you already spending your dollars? And so that becomes the geographic area where that we study. And so once we determine that relevant market, then everything else we do after that is looking at firms only within the relevant market. So if there are firms in California who maybe you utilized and spent money with, they won't be part of our analysis because they're outside of the relevant market. And part of that is because we want to be comparing apples to apples, available firms within a certain geographic area with firms utilized within a certain geographic area. So it is kind of good news because, again, about the relevant market, because you're spending your dollars pretty close in. The majority of your dollars are being spent right here in your metropolitan statistical area and not in California or in adjoining states. So availability is really who are the ready, willing, and able firms who are within that, again, that relevant market area who could be doing business with you. And we divided it and disaggregated it into 5 different industries. So construction, which is all horizontal and vertical construction, A&E, which is architecture, engineering, surveying, construction managers, professional services or other professional services are legal, finance, Healthcare services, consultants go into that category. Other services is everything else, printing, lawn service, advertising, IT, everything else goes into that category. And then goods is anything that's tangible. So if you look at the availability, and we broke it down by ethnic groups, and again, these are certified firms, because that's the only way we can know whether a firm is actually owned and controlled by certain demographic groups, is because they're certified. If they are not certified, they fall into kind of that catch-all category of non-MWBE. And so non-MWBE could be white male-owned firms, it could be publicly owned companies, or it could be uncertified minority-owned firms, but we don't know that. So if you look at this category, total minority in construction, 15.28% of all the firms in that MSA are owned and controlled by minorities. 12.52% by non-minority women. And then in A&E, we've got 9.72% minority ownership, 16.49% non-minority women. In professional services, 18.23%, minority 11.69%, non-minority women. And then in other services, 19.25%, minority owned, 11.78%, non-minority women. And then in goods, 7.99%, minority 11%, non-minority women. Next slide, please. So then we looked at how is Metro Nashville actually spending its dollars? Who is it spending its dollar with? And again, we did a 5-year study period. So this is over a 5-year study period. We looked at every payment that Metro Nashville made to any vendors over that study period. So you'll see the total over there of $5.4 billion over that period of time. There are some exclusions. We take out not-for-profits, we take out utilities, we take out other government entities, so that these are really, this accounts for everything else. So out of that $5.4 billion in construction, you had $1.4 billion that was spent over that 5-year period. And again, if you look down at the bottom, the percentages, 1.4% of that was spent with minority-owned firms, 2.04% with non-minority women in construction. And then in A&E, you have less than 1% spent with minority-owned firms, 16.37% with non-minority women. Professional services, both minorities and non-minority women at, about a third of a percentage. In other services, 1.71% was spent with minority-owned firms, non-minority-owned firms 0.4, or non-minority women 0.47%. And then in goods, 1.65% with minority-owned firms, 2.29% with non-minority women, and overall total 1.5% with minority-owned firms, 1.91% with non-minority women. Now, this is prime utilization. So these are firms who had awards directly from Metro Nashville. So then we did something called total utilization, which is primes and subs. So what we were trying to find out is, of all the dollars spent over that 5-year period, what percentage was spent with minority and women-owned firms, whether or not they were primes or subs. So for example, if you had $1 million award and it was a non-minority or non-MWBE firm who got that award, when we did the prime analysis, that whole $1 million was counted as non-MWBE dollars. When we do this analysis, if they had $1 million award and then they subcontracted out 200,000 to an African-American owned firm and 200,000 to a non-minority woman-owned firm, we would now have that be 600,000 kept in the non-MWBE category, 200,000 moved over to the African-American category, and 200,000 to the women-owned category. So it's kind of, where did those dollars end up? So when we did that, it changed the percentages a little bit. In construction, total minority dollars was 3.24%, non-minority women 6.15% in construction. And then in A&E, total minority dollars 1.85%, non-minority women 18.79%. When you get to professional services, other services and goods, those numbers don't really change much because there's very little subcontracting in those areas. So at the end, again, the total is 2.06%, minority spend 3.17%, non-minority women. So this chart is just an easy way to see where those disparities are. The disparities are comparing the percentage of available firms to the percentage of utilization. So if 10% of all of your A&E firms were African-American, did they get 10% of the A&E dollars? So parity, if you assume that parity is 100, so that means availability and utilization meet, that would be parity. The closer you get to zero, the deeper the underutilization disparity is. We only counted here if the disparity was 80 or less. So in other words, that area, gray area, kind of between 80 and 100 is considered not statistically significant. So where you see X's means that the disparity was 80 or below. In the report itself, you'll actually see the those numbers of where the disparity index is. So it's pretty much in every category, in every MWBE category, there is statistically significant underutilization in prime contracting, except Asian American owned firms in goods. So then we did the same thing for total utilization, and Asian American owned firms were overutilized in construction and in goods, and non-minority women were overutilized in A&E when we added in and reallocated those dollars based on prime plus sub. But all the other categories remained as being statistically significantly underutilized. So our overall findings were that we did a regression analysis. So a regression analysis really is, we answered the question of, is there a simple disparity? We then answer the question of, is that disparity significant, statistically significant? So there's one more question, which is causation, which is, what's the likelihood that that disparity was not caused by race and gender neutral factors like the age of the owner, the education of the owner, how long they've been in business, how many employees they have, a number of things like that. So a regression analysis kind of equalizes or controls for all of those factors. And then if there's still a disparity, then the courts allow us to make what it calls an inference of discrimination, which says that the likely cause of the difference and the disparity is the race and gender of the owner. So when we did that, we found that these other factors can't fully account for the statistical disparities that we found, and that the status as a minority or women-owned business continues to have an adverse impact on a firm's ability to get contracts with Metro Nashville. The anecdotal evidence, which as Trinity said, we did extensively. We had surveys, we did one-on-one interviews, we had focus groups, we had public hearings, we took comments, we had an informational meeting where firms talked. we heard across the board kind of things that supported what we saw statistically. So as David pointed out, under Croson, Metro Nashville can continue its existing race and gender neutral programs, which it has those as well. And we also found that there is a factual predicate under Croson and under current federal law for race and gender conscious remedies for those racial, ethnic, and gender groups for which a statistically significant underutilization was found. So all those places where you saw those X's. So we do have some commendations. There are lots of things that you all are doing well. You have a small business reserve program, and that's that program where you've kind of set aside certain awards that can only be bid on by small businesses. Love that. It's really a good program that you have. Project by project goal setting. You don't have a one size fits all. You have a goal setting process that allows for the better participation on a subcontracting basis for firms. You have done really good job in terms of your staffing and providing resources for remedial programs for BAO, and then improved data from Oracle systems since 2020. I will say, because I was around for the last disparity study, hugely better data than you had back in the last study and from this Oracle system since 2020. So we always appreciate it when we have much better data. Forecasting, we hear a lot in the community of this idea of a good old boy network, or informal network, lots of things behind that comment, but one of them is that these firms have an inside track on information, so they know when something's coming out before anybody else knows. Well, one way to squelch that is forecasting. You are doing forecasting. We do commend you for doing that. That helps to do away with some of that as a reality, because if everybody knows a year ahead of time that certain awards are being made, or after the budget comes out, you begin to advertise what's coming up over the next year, then nobody can say, well, somebody else knew about that way ahead of time and they had more time to prepare. Commercial non-discrimination policy. Since 2008, Metro Nashville has had a commercial non-discrimination policy. That's a great thing. It gives a lot of leeway for you to ask a lot of questions and look at whether your primes are behaving in a discriminatory fashion. And by the way, Metro Nashville does have an obligation not to be a passive participant in any active discrimination of its prime contractors. So if you have, sometimes we'll hear from agencies, well, that's between, we just hire the prime, what they do really isn't our business. Well, under Croson, you do have an obligation not to be a passive participant. Bonding and insurance, great that you give some leeway to the purchasing agent to do some waiver where there's low dollars and low risk. Transparent bid evaluation process. This is a really good process. Very few jurisdictions have this, where they do publish kind of where the shortfalls and the strengths were in the bidders and make that available. That's really a great thing that you do. You instituted training seminars and workshops. That's the biggest thing we hear, is that firms want supportive services, and you're providing a lot of them. And then the use of commodity codes. Having numbers that tell us what firms do is a lot easier than us trying to figure out what firms do, to put them in categories. And also, it's a lot easier in terms of how you notify firms of upcoming bids. So the use of commodity codes is a great thing, using NIGP codes. So we do have some recommendations. One of our recommendations is to require joint ventures on large construction projects. The last study, as well as this study, and I remember sitting in a room with a number of large construction primes who were minority and women-owned firms. and hearing them say, we're doing okay, but we look around Metro Nashville and we don't see our names on any of these buildings because they're doing well, but then again, when you look at some like equally situated firms, they're not getting that opportunity to get involved with some of these large projects. So having a requirement, the city of Atlanta has had and is considered a rates neutral program, a program that says that on construction projects over 5 million, you must joint venture with a firm where the owner does not look like you. So it could be an African-American owned firm who's the prime, and they have to joint venture with someone who doesn't look like them. So it kind of requires that, and theirs has been in place for over 30 years. And it has really helped to, we always look at wealth distribution and diverse communities and doing business across in lots of communities. And in Atlanta, that's kind of been a success story. Targeted outreach. It's always a good idea, as you know, forecasting, you're doing forecasting. Part of forecasting allows you to not be passive in terms of who you're doing business with. If you know there's a firm who's down the street and you're doing a big transportation project or a stadium, and you know they provide services that are going to be needed for that project, but they're not certified, they're not registered, and nothing prevents there to be targeted outreach to look for firms who do the kind of work that you're going to be needing in the near future. Consistent use of the Small Business Reserve Program. We love the fact that you have a Small Business Reserve Program, but it hasn't been used as much because the thresholds are low. And so we have been working with BAO to look at where that threshold should be raised to so that you can use it more. Because if you say, well, in order to be part of this, you have to have annual revenues less than $2 million, then you may not have enough firms who meet that small threshold who can bid on that project. So you want to make sure that you make your thresholds where you're including small businesses and that these thresholds are where only small businesses can bid, but you don't want to make it so small that they become more micro businesses. Review external facing vendor system to navigate easier. We heard a lot of complaints about being able to manage the process, having some people to talk to, being able to get into the vendor system. It's kind of a complicated system. So looking at that external vendor system where firms have to submit bids to make sure that it is as streamlined as possible. And then review and monitor prime and subcontractor payments. All payments to primes and subcontractors should be reviewed and monitored. On the subcontractor level, all subcontractors, not just minority and women and small, should be monitored. What we found is that if you don't monitor them, firms don't live up to what they promise when they put in a bid. So they'll put in a bid and say, I'm going to subcontract this out to XYZ firm and I'm going to subcontract this much. But if you're not watching, that may not happen. And then you get to the end of a project and they were used to get the project, but then they weren't included in that project. So reviewing and monitoring prime and subcontractor payments is important. On the prime side, it's also important to make sure that you're looking at prompt pay provisions. We heard a lot of complaints about prompt pay, and we know that particularly for smaller businesses, and as you really are using your Small Business Reserve Program, slow pay can put a firm out of business. Not only can it put them out of business, but if they've got subcontractors, either they have to pay subs out of their own pockets, or again, those subs have problems. So prompt pay is a big issue. not just with you, but we tend to see that in a lot of jurisdictions and hear some horror stories of firms who really are affected because of the delay in them getting payments. We recommend that you continue your aspirational and contract by contract goals. Aspirational goals are internal measurements of how well are you doing. And you want to look at those availability numbers. And at the end of every year, when you total up, whether it's prime or sub or however they came in the door, how are you utilizing MWBEs? Even if you do not a lot more, it tells you where you are. How well are we doing? And you don't know how well you're doing if you're not measuring that. And in some jurisdictions, they use it as a performance measure for departments. Are you meeting any of these goals? And then contract by contract goals are important, that you are not just putting one size fits all on all contracts. So instituting data reform, one of the collateral benefits of us doing this study is that we have looked, as I said, at every payment that Metro Nashville made to vendors over a 5-year period. We looked at every award. We looked at subcontractor payments that you were monitoring. We looked at vendors. We looked at your whole structure of data. And so there were things that we looked at. You're using iSupplier and B2G now databases. We had a lot of duplicate vendor records. So again, these are kinds of things that we can recommend that you all can fix. And again, we want to see you track all sub-award and payment data, both non-MWBE and MWBE, because we can't see what percentage of all subcontracts are paid to MWBEs. We can't know that if you're not tracking non-MWBEs because we don't know what the universe is. And then finally, review current policy and procedures to maintain up-to-date vendor certification records. You all, one good thing is you take certifications from other jurisdictions. That's great. But what happens is if those records are sitting there for too long, then you're notifying firms, but you don't have up-to-date records. So we want to have up-to-date records as well as develop a more streamlined process for vendors to register their certifications with Metro Nashville and to keep an updated B2G Now directory. So that's a summary of a very large, so when you read the report, if you've not read it, we have an executive summary that kind of gives you the overview. Sometimes that's all that some people read. If you want a deeper dive, there's the whole study, which is several hundred pages. And then if you're the real nerd who wants really all the real details, there are appendices with a lot of tables and a lot of detailed data in the appendices. So depending on what level of detail you want, it should all be in the report. And we're open to any questions.
Thank you so very much. Colleagues, you all received an email from Director Darby informing you that the presentation will be uploaded to the Budget and Finance Committee SharePoint as well as the Minority Caucus SharePoint. So just so you know, that has already been uploaded. So we do have access to this presentation currently. With that, we'll go ahead and start taking questions. I believe I saw Vice Chair Toombs. Did I see your hand up? Okay, Councilmember Gamble, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here. I've watched several of your presentations over the 20 or so years that you all have been working with Metro government and appreciate your service. Wondering if you have a comparison of where we are now compared to the last 5 years. It seems like we've made some gains, although there are still some gains to be made. But if you could talk a little bit about how we look as compared to the last 5 years.
Yeah, so we didn't do a direct comparison, but of course we can do that. But I will tell you my overall sense was you are doing better, even though we still see all those the disparities. You're doing much better than they were, even deeper, I think, when we came back the last time. And there are a lot more tools that you have now. So, you know, the big recommendation is to just sharpen the tools you already have, because you have a lot of tools in hand for both race neutral and race gender conscious activities. So it's all there. It's just sharpening, getting more firms involved.
Thank you for that. And you mentioned it during the presentation that, I forget which case it was, but it justifies this, us continuing to use this disparity study as a way to continue our race-conscious procurement goals. Do you see any problems? And if you can elaborate, anybody wants to elaborate on that moving forward? I think there could be some potential problems with the federal government, but just in your experience and expertise in that area, what is your recommendation there?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And, we continue to monitor both the federal executive level and the federal courts as well. But, again, the Students for Fair Admissions case, really did bolster the Croson analysis, which is what applies to procurement disparity studies. And so, at the current time, the federal law still accepts the compelling governmental interest that is remedying discrimination or the present effects of past discrimination. That's still permitted, and that was explicitly discussed in the Students for Fair Admissions case, which contrasted that with student diversity goals. And so at the current time, the Supreme Court still stands behind Croson, and so that's the analysis that we continue to utilize. And of course, if that changes, we will be back here discussing what those changes might, portend for Metro Nashville.
Thank you, Councilmember Gamble. Vice Chair Toombs, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a few questions. So when we talk about like minority ownership, what constitutes minority ownership? Because feedback that I've received is that, certain faces will be put forward as the face of a company so that it's a Black-owned or minority-owned company, but it's not really controlled by a minority. So what is the threshold for determining what ownership is?
So I would answer that in that we accept what we look at certification. Okay, so certification, we don't do the certification. The certification is done by the ones we accept have been the ones that are done by government agencies. Typically, and I'll let someone from Metro Nashville talk about what your threshold requirements are, but typically it's got to be a firm that is at least 51% owned and controlled by that particularly ethnic group.
Oh, my apologies.
Christopher with Metro Nashville BAO. That is correct. We accept reciprocal certifications from certifying entities, and all those reciprocal certification entities have to have that same requirement that Ms. Jenkins spoke about.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
And I think part of what you're asking also is how robust are those certification requirements? How far do you look in? Some jurisdictions, again, we didn't question the certification, although we did listen to what we heard anecdotally. What did firms tell us? And we did not hear a lot of front conversations, which we hear in some jurisdictions, we hear over and over again, there are a lot of fronts, that there are particularly firms where the husband puts the firm in his wife's name. And so how do you keep that from happening? One of the robust things to do in certification process is to have site visits so that and when the site visits, and also look at things like, well, if it's an engineering firm, is the wife the bookkeeper and the husband's the engineer? That makes a big difference. Do they perform a commercially useful function in that business? So there are a lot of, and government entities are usually pretty good, depending on how much staff they have. Because if you got a program that's got 2 staff members, then it's going to be difficult for them to do site visits, which is not just going to the business, but also going to the construction site. So are you looking at trucks that are actually owned by the prime, but the sub is the one who's driving them around? I mean, so there are lots of telltale signs as to whether you have fronts or not. But generally, government entities are pretty good about looking at them, and if they're not, we usually hear it a lot out in the field, and we did not hear a lot.
And so looking at the numbers that you show, the percentage of minority-owned business participation looked decent in comparison to percentage of minorities in Nashville. But looking at the actual dollars, the dollars were like really low, in my opinion. What was it, 5.4 billion, and less than 1% went to African Americans, and even lower percentages to other minority groups. So what is and in your work that you've done, what strategies have you seen work in terms of increasing those dollar amounts that wouldn't run afoul of the law? And I know you mentioned Atlanta. Have they had success with increasing the dollar amount to minority-owned businesses so that it's a larger percentage of the total spend?
So I'll pass that question to Attorney Strong, since he was the Director of Contract Compliance during really a lot of the development phase of the City of Atlanta's development of its program. So Rodney, you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Mr. Strong, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we, with regard to the dollars, one of the big things is you have to identify where what you're really looking at in terms of where the opportunities are. And what I mean by that is sometimes when you're looking at certain large projects, you'll have certain exclusions. You'll have certain things that are really not competitive. But when you look at the overall spend and the dollars, I think that there is a lot of room for improvement, because obviously that's one of the reasons we made the recommendation on the joint venture side to get more minority and women-owned firms involved in the prime contracting on the larger projects. And that has a big impact on the dollars. And so the reason that you see so many more dollars flow in a program like Atlanta that Michelle referenced is because they've consistently had a joint venture requirement. And so when you're spending give you a good example, our firm was a supply diversity consultant for the construction of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It's a $1.5 billion project. Well, by the time we got through with looking at, the IBM came in as a sponsor for all of the electronics, and we backed out a couple of $100 million there. There was some steel that could only be sourced in Europe that we had to back out of it. So we agreed between the Arthur M. Blank Enterprises, which owns the stadium, and the city, that we would be looking at a $979 million competitive opportunity. And of that, we were able to get about 38%, just slightly less, 37.9% of dollars that went to minority firms. But that involved joint ventures at several different levels, joint ventures at the prime level, and then joint ventures at the first tier sub level on major components of the project. And then also certain projects, advances that we looked at. So I'm just using that as one particular example. And so there are a lot of techniques that you can use to get more participation. And we've been talking to Mr. Wood, we've been talking to the team that you have here about ways that, as we move forward, we can increase those dollars. So, but I'm very aware of the need to step up the amount of dollars that are flowing. And that's one of the reasons we made so many robust recommendations. In addition to just giving you the commendations, we said, hey, look, there are these other things that you can do.
Thank you for that. My next question was, when you talked about monitoring prime and subcontractor payments, like, are you just talking about, the payment that lump sum that goes to the prime or that lump sum that goes to the subcontractor? Are we looking at making sure they're paying their workers? Like, how deep are we getting into that? Are we just making sure those lump sums are going to the owner of the company?
Yeah, historically, we're not looking at the payments to the workers because usually, you're going to have, requirements that are, most projects, depending on whether or not there are federal funds involved, there's going to be Davis-Bacon wage requirements. And in those cases, of course, there's going to be a monitoring of the workforce. But in other cases, you might not have local ordinances or state ordinances that require that monitoring, but usually there's reporting. When people don't get paid, you usually find out that people aren't getting paid. But it's really important to be able to monitor what was promised and what was paid to the subs. And that's critical because what happens with subcontractors is that oftentimes when they're bidding when primes are bidding a project, they make certain commitments. And it's important to monitor those work sites to make sure that those subs are actually on the job. That deals with the whole question of not necessarily front companies, but sham arrangements, where firms are not actually performing on jobs. And so you have to monitor work sites. So that type of monitoring is extremely important. But one of the things that's easier to do now is to capture the data on payments. And what Jeff, most of the systems, and there are a couple of computer systems, you all use B2G now, and it has a module that allows you to pay a prime, and the prime has to submit all of the payments that were promised to all the subs that were made. And they say, well, we certify we've made all these payments to these subs. Then the subs have to come in and verify those amounts. And so you have a double check because the prime is saying, I paid this sub X amount, and the sub is coming back and saying, yes, I was paid X amount, or I wasn't paid X amount. Oh, I'm turned over to Mr. Wood and let him tell you exactly what he does.
Thank you, Rodney. Yeah, so just for clarification on that, so within the BAO, we do have staff that's contract compliance staff, and for each contract that is awarded and it has utilization on there for minority, women, and small businesses, we have a contract compliance staff assigned to that contract that does monitor it throughout the life of the project. And so we ensure that the reporting is done. Once Metro reports that a prime has been paid, notification goes out to those prime contractors. They then have to allocate their payments to the subs that they propose to utilize. We go into the system to confirm that those subs confirm those payments were made. If we notice any discrepancies in the amount that should have been paid and what was reported to be paid, our compliance staff then conferences with both the prime contractors and the subcontractors to make sure those payments get allocated correctly.
And my final question, Chair, and I know the feedback that you received as you were doing your research is kind of intertwined in your results, but was there any particular feedback that you kept hearing over and over again as you were doing your research?
Yeah, several things. So we did hear when we looked at, we asked some questions, particularly in our survey, about submitting bids. One of the things when we did our regression was that minority and women-owned firms tend to submit less bids on a controlled basis, less bids. And so in the anecdotal, we heard that the contract was too expensive to bid on, or that, and some who complained about the technology deployed by Metro Nashville, saying that it was outdated and frustrating, that the external facing technology that Metro Nashville uses is bulky, cumbersome, and erratic. I mean, we heard comments like that. We also heard that firms found that other government agency sites were easier to navigate. So they did do kind of we did get some comparative comments. That was a big one. Survey results were also that there was a perception that minority firms were not getting subcontracts. So interesting that we heard a lot of we're not getting contracts. And of course, we heard Good Old Boy Network. And we heard that 51% of women, 83% of African Americans, 78% of Asian Americans, 66% of 66% of Native Americans and 50% of Hispanic Americans said that there was an informal network that monopolized the procurement process. We heard that there was not enough outreach to firms. And then many MWBs complained of difficult relationships and possibly discriminatory treatment from prime contractors. Those were probably the top things that we heard. Oh, and payments. That was the other thing.
Did you have any additional questions, Vice Chair Toombs? I'm going to recognize Councilmember Webb, then Sroor, then Councilmember Ellis, but I had one quick follow-up from what Councilmember Toombs just asked. Did your data support, I know sometimes there's a disparity between what people feel and what data shows is actually happening. So with people feeling like there was, that minorities were not getting the contracts and people feeling like there was an internal system that was determining who's getting the contracts, did the data support those feelings, or how would you all kind of respond to that?
Yeah, so the data definitely supports them not getting contracts, and you're looking at disparities in every category, pretty much on the prime level, and in most areas on the sub level, you're looking at those X's in those boxes. And those disparities were fairly deep. I mean, you're looking at, availability, for example, in construction of 15% minority, 12.5% women. But then when we look at the actual utilization in construction, only at 1%. So 1.40% utilization compared to 15% availability. That's a big disparity. And in women, non-minority women, 2% utilization compared to 12% availability. So that's kind of borne out. Whether that's an informal network or not, that takes a little bit more looking at, I think, probably internally than it does from us looking externally. I mean, we hear it a lot, not just with you, we hear it in contracting. One of the ways to kind of look to see if there's any fire with that smoke is to look at, are the same firms getting contracts over and over and over again? And if they are, is to just make sure that that's a fair process. And when I say fair process, there's one thing that tends to happen a lot that people think is fair, but really isn't when you're doing government contracting, which is in the evaluation process, you'll hear even staff say, well, did you take into account the fact that we've worked with them before and we really like them and we want to work with them again? So the evaluation process itself can include, even though it's not written down somewhere, that there's somebody who's saying, I really like this firm. We've worked with them and their father went before them for the past 20 years. They do good work for us. And that's a human thing to say, but it also excludes the new entrance of new firms to giving other firms an opportunity. If you took that, well, they're the same firm we've used over and over again, so let's just use them. That's something that I think Metro Nashville has to kind of look inward at and see whether that's what's happening.
Thank you so very much. Councilmember Webb,
So being a part of this system, I'm a non-minority small business owner. I'm a contractor, actually. So how does bidding a job, if we're, we got the RFP and we're bidding the job and we bid it and it's supposed to be lowest bid, how does all that come into play there with being able to be a good old boy network? I'm trying to learn this because I want to know. I think the problem with the system is iSupplier is the hardest for, I've worked on a lot of systems in my job. And iSupplier, if you don't have somebody helping you navigate that as a new contractor or anybody, you're just screwed. It is probably the hardest out there for anybody that's new to the system. Now, I'm not saying once you learn it, it's not easy, but the point is people coming in to get it. I mean, how do you feel about iSupplier? It can't be one of the rated highest ones. This can't be.
Well, a lot of jurisdictions use iSupplier. It's kind of how it's set up. So it's not the iSupplier itself. It's not the package itself. It's how you set it up and how complicated it is. And so if you're feeling that way, imagine somebody who's not as familiar with the system. And now we're talking about even getting some small businesses involved.
Exactly.
It gets more and more difficult. Small businesses don't have somebody who that's all they do all day is do bids. A lot of small businesses.
And that's what I was going to say. I've heard from so many people like, well, we'd like to bid on Metro deals, but Lord, it takes so much time and to go through that system, we're not going to do it. And I'm talking about like small business. You're right. We're not a big business, so we don't have 10 million people over here to do our bids, 10 million people over here to get the bids from the subcontractors and that kind of stuff. And I think until we get that better and even lower the dollar amount, like, we have all these WeGo contract bids coming out. But if we bid a whole area of concrete, nobody's going to get sidewalks, is what I'm saying, concrete for sidewalks. I'm just using that as an example. A small business is never going to get that. And then, like you said, we depend on the prime. And I have used a lot of people that use that system to where we have to go in and we have to prove that we got our check and stuff. I think we ought to be implementing that tomorrow. I'm just going to tell you, I think that will really, really see if what these people are saying, these big companies, because you do see the same big companies getting a majority of the contracts. And it is, I would like to see a share go, and I don't know how this is cut out, but, to a certain amount of small business and everything, because we're just as important as the big dogs, but I can't carry a $500,000 payroll on a $5 million job. You know what I'm saying? There's just so many obstacles there, but I think we're going to have to narrow that down a little bit more if we want to see this get better for minority and non-minority small business women owned. I would really like to go into a really deep conversation to my ideas of how I really think we could get this better.
Right. So yeah, some of the issues with kind of the good old boy network is time. Some of it's time. So some of it's, if you know about something before you got 8 weeks to put in a bid proposal and you have time to prepare for it, that's one thing. We also see bid shopping. We also see exclusive subs. So there are subs who do some kinds of work and then the primes go and just gobble them up and you go to get them in as a sub because you need them on that work. And they say, sorry, I'm already working with this guy over here who's got the relationships. And then of course, pricing, pricing is if you have that relationship and you can get that concrete at a better price, then you're going to be the lower bid. But there's a lot of bid shopping. That's a real thing. Rodney, I don't know what else you might have to add to that. Oh, and the Small Business Reserve that we talked about is a robust program where only small businesses can bid against. It's a threshold under which only small businesses can bid against each other, the big businesses. And we recommended a place where that really was important for Georgia Department of Transportation. There were 79 firms who were winning all the contracts to build roads in Georgia. And those same 79 contractors were also gobbling up all the maintenance work, those 250,000, 300,000 maintenance jobs all around the state. So by having a small business reserve, that kept them out and allowed small businesses, quite frankly, within each of the districts, so local to, you know, wherever, whatever county you're in, to have a chance to get those maintenance contracts. We've also seen it in Toledo, Ohio. They had, unbundling's another thing. So the unbundling, they used to do a big mowing contract, same contractor every year or every, couple of years, got that mowing contract. And then they decided to unbundle it and let a lot of smaller firms take the mowing contracts in different sectors or zones of the city. It's been very successful, very popular. And so now you've brought all these small businesses into being primes and winning these, is administratively a little more? Yes. To administer 10 or 12 mowing contracts rather than one big one to this one firm who kept winning it all the time. But it did a lot for local small businesses.
I hate to say this, but I never had even heard of the Small Business Reserve until you said it. How many people in here had heard of that? I'm just curious. And I know all of y'all over there have, and the O-termers. So is that on Nashville.gov? I mean, it is. So evidently we're not doing a very good job at educating that, because here I am a small business. I've been on that Nashville.gov 100 million times and have never even seen a pop-up with Small Business Reserve on it. So maybe we need to do better at educating that program a little better. Just my opinion. Sorry over there.
Would you like to be recognized? I see you grabbing the mic.
Yes, I was going to say the Small Business Reserve Program information, it is on our Nashville.gov underneath purchasing and the BAO. It talks about the requirements for that. If you are a Metro approved small business, then you are part of that program. And what it does is if we have a solicitation that meets that $250,000 threshold that we have now, where it's not going to exceed that, then those are the individuals, when we publish it, it'll be a note in there in the system that is Small Business Reserve, and as long as you are registered with that correct commodity code that the solicitation is for, you will be notified of that solicitation. But that is something, thank you for your remarks on that, and I will incorporate that into some training about how to educate people on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Webb. Councilmember Sora, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very quick. I have a couple of questions, and thanks for the presentation. Very eye-opening. We knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was that bad. When we only have 5% of minority owned out of the 100%, I mean, like, it's just, I know that when you're looking at minority, African-American fare well in that group, but when you're looking at the overall contract, which is $5 billion, everybody's just all together is only 5%. That's very low. So my first question is, in that data that was shown, I know that it's the combination of the prime and the sub. Do we know how many of those were sub or how many were prime?
Yeah, we do. So in the study itself, you'll see we not only showed the dollar amounts and the percentage of the dollar amounts, we also showed the number of firms that were prime firms. We don't have the number of subs that are in there, but again, that's something, if someone's interested, we can go back and tell you what the number of subs were. But you can see the differentials in the dollars from when we just looked at the prime in a category, and then when we put the sub dollars in there and move them around, you can see there's some movement on construction, and some of the other areas very little, because other than construction and A&E, there's very little subcontracting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I know that it was a combined one there, so look forward to looking at the main data to see. I'm just interested to know whether the only data or the only places where minorities are is only in the sub, and I think it's very critical to make that distinction. So I'll be happy to look at that. Also, the data that we're looking at, is it based on the surveys or where did those numbers come from? The reason why I'm asking this question is that we do have a diversity office. And sometimes with some of our contracts, we're told that this one is going to be 20% and was excited thinking we're doing so well. But I'm looking at the number, we're not doing as well as I thought we're doing. And so where's that disparity? Is that coming from them? Is that coming from something else? And where is that gap?
Straight from finance.
Straight from finance.
It's actual payments made. So we didn't just look at promised awards for utilization. We looked at actual payment data that came out of your finance department to show us not just overall payments, shows every payment made to every vendor over the last 5 years.
Thank you. And that's where looking at the payment throughout the life of the contract comes in, because if we have a promise to pay, or we're awarding a contract thinking it will be 20%, but if at the end of the day it ends up being 5%, that's ridiculous. And so that's where that recommendation of tracking those payments as we go along is going to be very critical. Thank you so much for that. The other question that I have, I know that there's a recommendation for joint venture. In a joint venture situation, then all of the people will be primes. Now, is there does it have to be a 50-50, or does it have to be, is there a threshold to be able to have a joint venture?
So no, there's not a threshold, but they have to submit all their documents. I mean, we've seen a stadium, I think we've seen stadiums where even 5 or 10% is a joint venture partner. So you got to look at things like not just whether they're splitting profits, but also work, because we've seen joint ventures where they'll say, okay, yeah, you're a joint venture partner and we'll give you 5% of the profit, but then they don't have any work on the project. So they're not making any money from conducting any services. So you do have to kind of look at who's doing what, and not just, and how that joint venture is administered. So if they're getting 5% of the profit and 5% of the work, and then we count those dollars as prime dollars. But we only count what's actually being part of the joint. So we look at the joint venture agreements to make sure they're bona fide. And again, you have to track those dollars.
And Metro will have 2 contracts with the, or how does that work? Or do they create another company for the joint venture?
So basically, you would have a contract with the joint venture organization itself.
Okay.
And just to the point of what Ms. Clark-Jenkins was saying, we'd also look at with the joint venture, the level of investment of each of the joint venture partners. So how much are you putting in? How much work are you doing? And then how much are you actually receiving from it? So it's like everybody's got skin in the game. It's not just a matter of, you've got your minority joint venture or woman-owned joint venture partner receiving benefit, receiving revenues off of it, but they haven't put in any investment. And that's the way that the code is written. If you look at the procurement code now with the Equal Business Opportunity Program, there's some detail about how joint ventures should look and then how we should count them.
One moment, your mic is off. Could you introduce yourself for the record, please?
I'm so sorry. Michelle Lane, Deputy Finance Director.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Sora, now you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the tracking, when we're tracking the joint venture, are we looking at the joint venture entity? Are we looking at every partners that make up the joint venture in tracking our WDB number, WB number?
Well, I'll say based on the way that our code is written, you would be looking at the individual members of that joint venture to determine the amount of participation that would be counted. I don't know what you guys are seeing in other places, but that's the way that our code is written. And if I could just say one other thing, Madam Chair, I think that it's really important as part of this conversation to really think about the program that Christopher and his team operate. The resource that they have is a subcontractor-based program. So if you look at the subcontractor-based program itself and all of the payments that they track, against our total spend, they do pretty well. But in the larger scheme of all utilization, there's a deficiency as it relates to prime, which he doesn't really have a resource to help him promote prime utilization. And I think that that is a fair consideration as we talk about what kinds of things we can do to improve going forward. I think that, you know, there's the study shows, and the numbers in the study show that there's good fruit that's come out of the EBO itself as it relates to subs, but there's still a good bit of work to be done to pull those numbers up where our availability is, and the hole that we see is in the utilization of primes.
Thank you, and great work for the office. I'm not debunking, but I think that the prime is where the money is. The subgrade, the crumbs. And so if we're counting number in crumbs, then it's not going to matter because we're only getting 5% of the big bucket, and we're not going to stay there for a long time. So great work being done. But this is the whole point of all of this, to make sure that we have more than that. And so my last question, and thank you so very much, is that one of the problems that we have is the system. And I know my colleague was talking about finding stuff, and I know that some of the complaints that you have is with regards to how cumbersome and how it's not easy to navigate. Do you have any recommendation, or is there a city that have a system that works very well that you've come across that we can try to look into?
Yeah, I would say, Rodney, I'll ask you to. Yeah, I would say Charlotte, North Carolina has a good system. You know, yeah, Charlotte has a good system. There's some aspects of Memphis's system that are good. And Memphis has an open data system. So it does kind of keep them on track with some things because everything is transparent on this data. It's called a data hub. So I would say those two. Rodney?
Yeah, you know, I'm not sure about these newest, you know, systems. I mean, I know these new electronic systems. So, you know, not naturally now that Dylan is doing a lot more of that work, I'm not really sure about that.
Yeah, I can tell you the ones who have great data and the ones that we don't hear a lot of complaints about their navigation system. I'd say Cincinnati also had great data, and I also don't think we heard a lot of complaints about navigating their system. Bexar County, Texas. There's a woman who's been in their program for years, Renee Watson, and they do everything they can to help firms to navigate everything. Even like when firms are getting their DBAs, they got people like at that office snatching them to get, you know, come get certified, come figure out what you're doing. What are you doing? How can we help you? And walking them through the process. So those are the ones I can just think of off the top of my head.
You're recognized.
Thank you. So currently we are doing R12 as our Oracle. We're doing an update migration to the cloud, which will, I believe, start going into effect in January. So we're looking to see some improvements with the registration system for vendors and the software we're using. So it should be a big improvement.
Councilman Sora.
Thank you. I'll make one last question, and that's on the reserve. I think when we look at what we do, we have that 250,000 thresholds for the small businesses to bid in Nashville. Is that considered low? Because I think if all we're doing is the 250, that's where everybody will be. Once you are over that, that's all the big people comes in after 250, and that's where the big number comes. So is that a good threshold, or is that something that we need to open up so that it limits big company from getting, I don't know, I'm just asking, how do you manage that threshold?
I would say it's probably one of the higher thresholds for us, for a jurisdiction the size of yours. Chicago is the biggest ones we've heard of. Theirs is 3 million. But a lot of counties and cities are actually at the 25,000 and 5,000 and 100,000. So 250 because remember, this is like a set aside where what you're saying is under 250,000 with those that can qualify because there are enough firms to bid, that only small businesses can bid. And 250 actually is a good number. I think a couple other places have 250 or 200. And I'm not sure, David, whether you've heard of ones that are much higher than that until you get to big, like Chicago or New York or someplace like that. So 250 is a good number.
Thank you, Councilmember Soror. Councilmember Ellis, you're recognized.
Thank you. I'll make it short because my phone's already gone into night mode.
Oh.
I was trying to think of a way to express gratitude to Miss Hernandez Lane for all the work that she did when she was in procurement before she took her fancy promotion. But that aside, two things. One, and I'm a first-time council member as well, so I'm still learning, and I'm a level 2 nerd, so can't wait to read the report that you all provided to us. One thing that we've started doing as a council body is accepting purchasing agreements, the cooperative purchasing agreements that other municipalities have taken on and, have done all the vetting. And we sort of accept, what they've done to take on a contract. Given where we are, is that a good or a bad thing, or what would your comment be?
So everybody does that pretty much.
Okay.
Most jurisdictions do that. They take on cooperative agreements. Sometimes they're statewide agreements. Sometimes they are, what do you call them? They're not called cooperatives. What do they call when you? Piggybacks.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're called piggybacks. I couldn't think of that term.
We're real fancy here.
But a lot of people do that, and it cuts both ways. Again, sometimes those are, if it's a woman, a minority-owned firm, and they get that piggyback, that's great. If they don't ever get any, and it just winds up being, a monopoly kind of thing, where the same firms are getting all the work in an area, anytime you have something that exclusionary, and so not everybody has a fair shot at it, kind of per se is not good. But again, I've seen a lot of those, cooperative agreements, piggybacks, those open task order contracts where they can be exclusionary, or if monitored well, they can present open opportunities. So I would just say I would monitor them and keep, just watch what's happening. But they can cut both ways, I think.
Thank you for that. And my last question is, I had a bunch, but I'll just end with this because you all have indulged us enough. Do you have any recommendations for using some of the new AI tools that have come online to help with the procurement process and sort of consolidating the time that it takes to draft the RFP and the time it takes to get all that language, which is, takes away from the time for some of these companies to be able to even bid because the deadline is so close. So any recommendations there, or is that included in your report?
No, we didn't get into the area of AI. But, if you think about the fact that AI is feeding everything that it knows from 10% of everything that happens in the world, whatever it is, into one, we see a lot of bad RFPs that I would not like to see repeated. So again, kind of can cut both ways. We're not big fans of AI in the sense of what we do because, you don't want your data, for example, uploaded to AI. We don't do that, which is take your data because we could upload your data AI and ask it to process your data for us. But now we've uploaded your data into AI. So once you put stuff in the stratosphere, it's there for, I guess, for kind of the taking. So, but I think what you're asking is, could AI write a good RFP? Yeah, absolutely. You know, if it's got some good RFPs that it's drawing from, then yeah, it can write great RFPs.
But would it help us be able to get some of these numbers higher? Do you think?
Councilmember Ellis, are you asking if we could use AI to increase the amount of business we're doing with minority businesses? Is that the question?
Yes. I'm trying to see how we can capture those sub folks, right? Since they're the ones that end up with the money. So I wonder if there's something that we're not including in the initial RFPs that could be included so that the subs would qualify.
I can't think of anything how that would benefit participation. Okay. You know, there are lots of ways AI could benefit participation, which is the more firms we have in availability, the more firms we can identify what they do, the more firms we have information on. So yeah, if I had a list of every firm who did business and I could upload that list into AI and tell it to spit back all the intelligence it has on all of these firms, that would hopefully increase it would increase the availability of the firms that I can identify in the marketplace, and hopefully maybe identify them. We haven't attempted to do that, mostly because we're under a requirement that our data with all of our clients is proprietary, so we can't upload it. But that would be an interesting experiment to see if it helped us with identifying more minority and women-owned firms.
Thank you.
Go ahead, David.
I'm sorry, just real quickly, and I agree, that's an excellent question. I think one of the potential barriers, as you heard with the small business owner here, is responding to the RFPs. That's really the people who might be able to benefit from some sort of computer generated response. It's not so much the RFP itself, it's the ability to respond meaningfully to the RFP and get a bid that's going to be attractive to Metro Nashville.
I see. Thank you. And I just want to say again, thank you, Ms. Hernandez-Lane, for all the work that you've done over the last few years to bring us to where we are now.
Thank you, Councilmember Ellis. All right, seeing no additional comments or questions, thank you all so much for your time and for this presentation. Thank you for council staff and everyone here for your time and being here. Thank you, colleagues, for staying. I know this was very long, and we will have some continued conversations about what this will look like and how we can work to do better as a city. And with that, thank you. This meeting is adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.